Let me know.
Yeah, we on now, man. We live, and I don't know if it's anybody here with us, but yeah, it's time to converse, man. So
He just dropped the live. He said, let's go.
yeah, let's go, man. Let's get it. So today we're gonna have a conversation about something that BGS talked about a little bit earlier. There's a guy who is a graduate student, and he's been doing research at the Black Manosphere. I think he goes by the name of Signifier. I don't know what the first initials are. I can't even remember.
Yeah, FD Signifier, I think it is.
FD Signifier. All right, but it's time that we weighed in because, I mean, he's critiquing the manosphere in general, but he also makes a critique of the Black manosphere. And we want to determine whether or not there's any accuracy there at all. And what are the inaccuracies that are there, if there are any? And I mean, I invite the guy to come have a conversation if he desires to do so. You know, he can talk to one of us. Okay, we have PhDs. Okay, you have a PhD in cultural studies, if I'm correct, right?
Right.
I have a PhD in philosophy. There is another brother who has a PhD in theology here, and we're all members of the Black Manosphere, okay? And we avow that we are, okay? And one of the reasons that I am is because I am of the firm belief that Black men need their own space to share their experiences and to consciousness raise and to discuss, their frustrations about the world that they live in. And if those frustrations just so happen to at any time involve women, whether they be white women, black women, purple women, blue women, polka dot women, then God damn it, I feel like we have a right to talk about it.
Right.
And to discuss it without being fettered by woke politics or political correctness, whatever it may be. And if it comes across as derogatory, sexist, if it sounds like it's toxic or whatever the case may be, I don't care. That's just my personal opinion about it. And one of the reasons why is because, for 60 years, Black men have heard the various ways in which they're violent, how they're savage, how they're sexist, how they create abuse in the Black community, how, they force upon, women unwanted sexual advances and so on and so forth. Here's the deal, man. And I've said this before. Much of the same shit that Black men get accused of in the Black community related to feminist narratives, discourses, or whatever the case may be, some of the same shit that they accuse us of are some of the same things that they're doing, bro. Mm-hmm. And that's my issue with it all. Like, if we're going to tell the truth if we're going to talk about the Black community and Black people and who's culpable, then we have to have an accurate, objective, and an impartial study of the lived conditions of Black people and the circumstances in which they exist, okay? And it doesn't matter if it's ugly. It doesn't matter if it's pristine. What matters is that we get it right, okay? Now,
Can I say something to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, it's important because here's the thing. It's not about whether or not we agree with everything anybody in the manosphere has ever said or not, because that seems to be the stand people take. You either got to agree with everything or else whatever. No, what I'm saying is I have always advocated for a space where men could develop their own thinking, Black men in particular, could develop their own thinking about, not only the world, but of course themselves, how gender relates to them, how we understand these various ideologies. Men needed a space to do this. And I don't lose any sleep that it didn't happen within the confines of the academy or in the confines of what's politically correct, which means I expect some of it to be brash. I expect some of it to be distasteful to those in the, within the more established respectability camp. It needed to be raw, and it needs the opportunity to develop in its own context. And that's what that's why the manosphere for me, has so much potential because, most of these other movements were developed with the approval of both, the established academy. We can get into white liberal theory, but I wanted to see black men develop their own thinking in a less sanitized space, a more free space, and a space that allows for their own thoughts that don't have to be approved by anyone. So I'm not upset if somebody's sensibilities are upset by what men talk about. It's high time that men have the space to do it. And that's one of the things I just want to add real quick.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to give a shout out to Sam C. Appreciate you, brother, man. He says tuition time. Keep on speaking up, gentlemen. And also I want to give a shout out to Timothy Blewett. Thank you for your donation. I know I just kind of came on. This was not, a show that was, posted earlier. But, I think it's time that we respond, okay? Because, look, I'm not here to protect the image of the black manosphere or to try to, situate it in the context with the white manosphere. So what, this guy has to say about the white manosphere, I'm not really interested in. I'm, for the most part, because I think that he's going to argue that many of the things that happen in the white manosphere kind of filter over into the black manosphere. But it only becomes more complicated because there's these racial issues that black men have to contend with. And, there are structural issues related to racism that impact black men in a deleterious way, okay? And so, it's not that black men in the manosphere are just blaming black women. Like if black women would just get with the program, then everything would just clear up. I don't think that that's what black men are saying about black women, okay, at all. Well, I mean, there may be some guys who are saying something like that, but it's bigger than that, okay? What black men have a complaint with is this. There's a narrative. If you want to start using, French philosophy in order to try to explain oppression and domination. Look, black women are human beings, are they not? They're human beings.
Actually, I have to say that. That's what.
And as human beings, they're fallible. They're not perfect. And black men are not perfect. I'm not here to say that black men are perfect. Fuck that. Black men are not perfect. They never have been. They never will be. There's nobody perfect, okay? There's no population or demographic of perfect persons, okay? And, black women can exhibit virtue and viciousness just as can men. And that's the issue, and when you start to unpack this shit, like, I talk to people about, the whole concept of dominant feminism, okay? And, that conversation was one in which, I kind of detailed exactly what, is being explained by it, okay? So a dominant feminist is a feminist that, for the most part, rejects equality feminism and difference feminism. Okay, now equality feminism basically is a form of feminism that seeks formal legal equality and equal access to traditional male privileges for women. Okay, now a difference feminist is going to be someone who seeks different legal treatment for women, like affirmative action in order to compensate for women's inequality. Okay, so to a difference feminist, male dominance is the result of long-standing inequalities between the genders. It's not something that men do consciously, but it's just this long-standing inequality that creates, the male dominance, okay? But dominance feminism is different. It ultimately argues that women's inferior position, if you want to call it that, because I just think that this is a blunt force way of looking at relationships between men and women, okay? And why? I mean, think about it. And I've said this, perfect example. It takes men and women, puts them into classes or categories and says that women are members of the proletariat and men are members of the bourgeoisie. It uses a Marxian heuristic to separate humanity into male and female, and it asserts that men have all the privileges, Women have all of the you know, the banes coming to them in society. Okay, now all you got to do is look at the condition of black men related to white women, and you'll see that's absolutely not a good means by which to assess privilege or to possess, you know, not possess, but in order to determine the positionality of someone. Just look at their gender, look at their sex, and then you can determine pretty much who's privileged and who's not. It's ridiculous. So even an indentured servant, say for example, in early colonial America, is that man, white man, going to have the same positionality as, say, for example, Thomas Jefferson's wife? I fucking doubt it. Definitely not a slave, a male slave, okay? So this whole idea that we can pretty much make these generalizations about privilege, status, influence, just based upon, you know, somebody's gonads is laughable to me.
Now, hold on, Gigi. We got Dr. Neil wants to come through.
Yeah. Tell him to come on in, man. The water's fine. Tell him to come on in. I'm gonna leave the invite for him. This is between the PhDs right now, so I know you might see this and feel tempted to chime in. We'll let BGS in because BGS has been, you know, kind of keeping up with us. But if he decides to come in, that's cool. But we want to kind of keep this conversation amongst us, okay? At the present moment, no shade, none of that. But we need to get this kicked off. And we're going to watch some of, you know, PDF's, well, not PDF, but what is his name again? FD. I just don't know the first initials.
Signifier.
Let's just call him Signifier. And that may be an allusion to semiotics and, you know, literary theory from Saussure or some shit like that. What's up, Dr. Neil? What's cracking?
What's going on? What's going on? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, brother. What's going on, man? How you doing, bro?
Peace and blessings, peace and blessings. It's the mad professor in the house.
What's going on, man? What's going on? Now, I mean, the only thing that's odd to me about, you know, the Signifier guys, this. I mean, we might not be the most popular persons in the manosphere, but fuck it, we're scholars and we exist in the manosphere. How can you be a content creator having discussions and talking about what's going on in the manosphere and the kind of positions that are being held and the kind of ideas that are being articulated here without at least engaging the people here who unapologetically and unabashedly profess to be members of the space and just kind of gloss over it's like, okay, well, whatever the fuck it is that they're talking about, really unimportant. We're just going to pay attention to Kevin Samuels, Tommy Sotomayor, some pickup artists and shit like that. Why do you think he glossed over our presence here? Because I know he has to have seen some of the shit now.
Yeah, you know, Dr. J has been on YouTube for 3 years. You've been on YouTube more than 2 years. I'm going on, you know, September will make 2 years for me. I don't think that you can get around any one of us. And, you know, I don't know if it was just his ignorance or he just deliberately ignored over the fact that there are academics, people who have been trained. We got PhDs with credentials. We know what we're talking about. But regardless of that, man, here's the thing. I don't hold male feminists, and I see him as a male feminist. I don't hold him in high regard. I think that people like him are consistent with the prison industrial complex. Feminism, folks on the left, liberals have been consistent over the decades in criminalizing us and putting a target on our back. They're not innocent. They're no different from the conservatives. They're no different from what Richard Nixon started back in the in the late 60s, early 70s, with inaugurating this deep criminalization of black men. Here's the reality. I don't want to spend too much time on this. Is that we don't have a space in academia to talk deliberately and explicitly about the death and jail situation of black men in the United States. And so the internet has given us this opportunity, the space to talk about these issues in ways that would never be addressed in academia. There is no place, and I said this 2 years ago with the George Floyd situation, man. This is May, well, we're in June, actually, 2 years away, removed from the summer of 2020, when this country just exploded, you know. And I said this on Facebook at that particular time, and I've been consistent since I came on YouTube, is that liberal feminism, queer feminism, liberalism, whatever you want to call it, postmodernism, cultural studies, does not adequately account for what we are dealing with. There is no sympathy, there is no empathy, there is no seriousness with respect to what we're dealing with in the United States. I watched parts of this guy's video, the stuff he said about the white manosphere, and at the end of his video, he talked about the black manosphere, and at the very end, you know, he comes off as a very criminalizing, pathologizing individual. And we have, I will give him to his credit, he did concede that there's legitimacy to what we're talking about. But he does not take that legitimacy seriously enough to critique the very ideologies and cultural paradigms that he has absorbed. This is a colonized figure. He's been colonized by these worldviews that were produced, you know, since the 1970s. And I agree with you. Michel Foucault, Judith Butler, all those theorists, French, American, Jewish, so on and so forth, what they created has no power or ability to capture what we are dealing with. And we have to be deliberate and relentless in contesting these narratives. It's offensive that we are coupled with the white manosphere. And I will say this: I'm very careful about how I identify myself. I typically identify myself as someone who is aligned with the black manosphere, because I know that the white manosphere, especially when it first kicked off, it was filled with a great number of problematic white men. And we have to be very clear that we are not them. And we have to dissent this idea that somehow or another that the black male condition is synonymous with the white male condition. And I will admit that there are some members of our manosphere or the black manosphere who might say things that mimic that the white males talk about, but it does not exhaust the totality of the voices that are here in this space. Okay, it's kind of like, you know, talking about Christianity or talking about Islam. There is not one version of Christianity.
Right, you got the Shiites and the Sunnis. You got you got Protestants and Calvinists. You have Seventh-day Adventists and Catholics. I mean, you know, so ultimately the manosphere is heterogeneous, even amongst white folks. The black manosphere is heterogeneous. Some black men in the manosphere are conservatives. Some black men in the manosphere are liberals. Some black men in the manosphere, you know, call for, you know, pro-blackness by means of black men and black women working together under the framework of nationalism. Okay, there's a whole bunch of different viewpoints here. Okay, but that's neither here nor there. The point, you know, I think that Dr. Neal is trying to put forth here is that, look, it's a heterogeneous group. You're going to hear a lot of different thinking here. Okay, but there's a point to the whole presence of the black manosphere. We haven't had the ability to speak candidly and frankly in the public sphere, in the academy, in media news outlets, in movies, books. We don't have that kind of endorsement. Okay, so the YouTube spaces or the internet spaces are the places where we've been able to come together, have conversations, consciousness raised, talk about our experiences. So it's a phenomenological exercise. Okay, it ain't always pretty. Okay, you're gonna hear some shit that's sexist here. Okay, but like when you listen to feminism, you hear sexist shit. I mean, I played a video not too long ago about the angry women in Britain, and they were fucking saying, "Kill me now, ask me how." Like that's like radical feminism isn't to some degree sexist and anti-misandry.
But wait. So how many male feminists did you hear critique that kind of behavior?
I haven't heard any of them.
See, well, two things. One, I just wanted to quickly say that's one of my problems with many of these male intersectional feminists. They only use the talking points they're authorized to use. I've never heard one of these cats actually put forth a critique of feminism, that had any merit to it. They just kind of go. I don't care if you're talking about the Mark Anthony Neals. I don't care if you're talking about. They always follow the company line, which to me smacks of disingenuousness. That doesn't suggest you're a critique. That just suggests indoctrination. But the other thing I wanted to quickly add to what Dr. Neal was talking about in terms of the Black manosphere, many of the brothers that founded the Black manosphere had difference with the white manosphere. They acknowledged that racism wasn't something that they could talk about in those spaces, and they needed a space where we could talk to our own experiences. So if you're going to lump the manospheres together and not acknowledge the the heterogeneity of all of this, you already have a disingenuous critique, because you're not taking into account just how subtle and nuanced many of the differences are. And that's actually a part of how the manospheres function.
Yeah, I mean, but I mean, the whole point is, even when you had like women come together, and I forget the woman who wrote the article, the person who was political, but I mean, they came together and had discussions and consciousness raised and vented and bitched and complained about what they felt was unjust and unfair about the world and their relation to men and patriarchy and shit like that. We have our same issues. We have the same set of issues, and there has not been a balanced response to any of this. And at least in the 80s and the early 90s, white feminists were able to argue with like men and other people who had opposing viewpoints on a whole host of issues. All we have is just an echo chamber of social justice warrior politics and political correctness according to a certain paradigm. And my argument is this shit has actually become a hegemonic discourse in and of itself. Yes. And look, you have a degree in cultural studies, okay? And I know for a fact that in a piecemeal fashion, like a pastiche, you put together like patchwork in a quilt, pieces of philosophy, sociology, and different, kinds of thought in, the continental tradition of philosophy. You kind of piece all this shit together without probing deeply into any of it. Now, look, I have a philosophy degree. I have a comprehensive degree, meaning I've studied the ancient philosophers, the medieval philosophers, modern philosophers. Also, I've studied contemporary philosophers. I know metaphysics, I know epistemology, I know political theory, I know ethics, okay? So I know logic, okay? So, but it's a survey. We don't just start at one point. There's a deep and a rich and a substantive historiography. I mean, and even within white philosophy, there's just disregarded, and all we do is we pick up on these post-structuralists and postmodernists. And look, I don't have a problem with postmodern philosophy. Okay, I don't have a problem with post-structural philosophy outside of the context of it being an echo chamber at the current moment. Like, what's the antithesis of it? What are critiques that are issued against it? Right?
But here's the thing. Here's the thing. The other thing that's not acknowledged are the deep strains of anti-black racism that flows through all of these discourses. Okay. The deep anti-black racism that you find in all expressions of white feminism in America and across the world, a kind of anti-black racism that is married to colonialism, the 19th century, even before that, You understand? And what they did, not just to black people, but what they did to Native Americans, what they've done to so-called brown people, in terms of just complete conquest. Okay, and so these folks who articulate these perspectives either ignore that history or their reality, or they fundamentally ignore it altogether for the sake of these bogus notions of equity and equality. You know, equity and equality are simply shields. They're not real things, because at the end of the day, can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, you know, what we have is this kind of undercover domination that we have dealt with, which is not acknowledged, and we're complicit. You know, the black people who are part of these projects, the black queer theorists, the black feminists. It doesn't matter what variety of feminism that you talk about. Even when you look outside of the United States and you look at Islamic feminists, you look at feminists who come from Pakistan, those who come from the subcontinent of India, they have complained, okay, about the extent in which feminism is a colonial project, okay? And that's just a very real thing, man. And these people, like this guy, FD Signifier, they're complicit in perpetuating this stuff and pretend to be innocent. They pretend to be innocent, and we have to call the innocence out. This is the only global mechanism, an alternative that we have, and we need to stand on it, and we not shirk from our positionality, and to continue to critique these folks and talk about our issues unapologetically.
Oh, for sure. And and look, so one of the things that is problematic about this whole discourse that comes from black feminists or intersectional feminists is the starting point, like where they start. I mean, did they go back to the rich history of the civil rights movement? Did they go back to black men advocating for suffrage for white women and black women, prior to Reconstruction? Like, I mean, for example, they just deny black men's contribution to first wave feminism, right? And they overlook or gloss over black men's participation in including women in the civil rights movement and in leadership positions within that movement. I mean, like, who the fuck is looking over Anna Julia Cooper? Who's looking over Fannie Lou Hamer? Right? Who is looking over these people? Who's looking over Ida B. Wells? Who's looking over Dorothy Height? And not saying that they had any contribution towards the civil rights struggle at all, right? Who's saying even during the Black Power movement that Kathleen Cleaver wasn't substantively involved? Elaine Brown, Angela Davis, Mae Mallory, and a whole host of other, women, right? This and the funny thing about it is, when it comes to the Black Power movement, it wasn't a respectable movement. The Black Power movement was. It was a paramilitary movement, okay? Created by black men and women who were basically trying to use revolutionary suicide and self-defense as a means by which to procure freedom for black folks who are getting gunned down by the police, man. Or getting, surveilled and harassed by police. That's what it was. It was a paramilitary organization. It wasn't, or everybody knows what the military is. We give orders, you follow orders. And was there some sexism involved? I'm sure that there was, right? But the issue with me is, look, at the end of the day, man, black men have always been some of the most forward, egalitarian thinkers, man, as it pertains to gender relations. And there's evidence of it in sociology. It's evidence of this shit, right?
But let's go. Can we go a little deeper than this? And what I mean by that is that when we look at so-called American democracy, when you look at the Constitution and all of that, and we look at the participation in black men in the American Revolution, the participation of black men in the Civil War, which ultimately led to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Okay, there is nothing that women have done that parallels what black men did in terms of producing constitutional democracy in the United States. Okay, so when they talk about equality and they talk about the right to vote and all that kind of stuff, there would not have been a right to vote without the Civil War, and black men died for it. And even the wars succeeding that, the First World War, the Second World War, and every war beyond that. Okay, and that is the history that is never ever acknowledged. Feminists have not laid their lives on the line. They have not gone to jail. They have not been killed. They have not been subject to social death in the same manner that black men have throughout the history of the United States.
Yeah.
Black men are a part of the history of democracy and freedom in the United States, and that cannot be denied. And we have to constantly remind them of that fact.
Well, and that's even true when you talk about, post BLM. I mean, when you ask the question, who were the activists on the ground that died, even from 2015 onward? It was the brothers. It was the brothers who were being set on fire in cars that nobody talks about to this day. Those are the only ones that died. Who are we talking about in terms of getting millions of dollars and buying mansions? It's a whole different dynamic, because we understand that the perception and treatment of black men, whether it's in grassroots activism, whether it's in contemporary accepted politics, or whether it's in any other format, black men are treated differently. But one of the questions I'm interested in exploring when it comes to these kinds of intersectional feminists are the ways that they kind of serve to be almost like kamikaze pilots when it comes to challenging and trying to check other black men. See, feminists don't want to actually engage what we're talking about in the manosphere. They want to shame it, they want to dismiss it, but they don't want to actually engage the arguments. And I think it's guys like this that kind of serve as mascots to a feminism that are sent to disrupt the discourse and deflect from the actual merit of the argument by actually posing these disingenuous arguments that are not really rooted in what we're saying, but rooted in what people feel like we're saying, all of which is a distraction from the point. When I listen to that, that's what I hear.
Yeah, so Black Wizard ADOS says that he has a podcast by the name of Bad Faith where he actually makes reference to us. Bruh, stop fucking around making videos about us. Come talk to us and have a dialogue with us. If you feel like your viewpoints and your arguments are Trump tight, come have an argument to prove your case. All black men are saying is, look, this feminist narrative, this whole concept, like, first of all, bad faith is an argument that's put forth in existentialism to talk about people trying to shirk away from, their ultimate responsibility to make choices. Like, that's what bad faith is in the philosophical tradition. I'm here in good faith. I'm here saying, look, I'm not pedestalizing women. I'm not infantilizing them. I'm saying, if you're going to point fingers at black men, well, where the fuck are the fingers being pointed at you? Because nobody in this world is blameless. Black women are doing the same shit that black men are doing in relation to domestic violence, in relation to sexual assault, okay? In relation to sexist and derogatory ideas and the proliferation of stereotypes and caricatures about black men. Like, this shit has been going on. And it's been going on for, I don't know what, the past 60, 50, 60 years? And there's been no formal rebuttal until now. And then now, the only thing you got is we fuck boys? That's the extent to which you have to respond to what we have to say? We fuck boys? Come on, man. That shit is some bullshit, bro. I don't care, man. Bring Mark Anthony Neal to the space. Bring David Eichert to the fucking space. Bring Mark, what's his name? Mark Lamont. Let them motherfuckers come to the space, man, and have these real conversations. Instead of just, using woke language that really, it can't be falsified. All you're doing is making a reference to philosophical terms from the Marxian or the critical theory tradition or the Frankfurt School or some shit like that, okay? Which is theorizing. And look, I'm a philosopher, bro, but fuck all this theorizing, man. We got to study the conditions of black folk. I believe that naturalism has to temper theorizing. We have to talk about the objective and the lived conditions of black folks so we can remedy some of these pathologies, okay? But we can't even actually get to that because all we getting is heavy and steady doses of fucking critical theory. And for the most part, look, I don't have a problem with critical theory. Look, we can talk about Marcuse, Horkheimer. We can talk about, contemporary incarnations of the shit, Adorno, or fucking Habermas. We can have them conversations. But let's have the conversations. We're not even having them.
But here's the thing. None of those theories or schools of thought have made a radical transformational difference in the lived condition of black people in the United States. They have not touched anything. Mm-hmm. Academic theories have not done anything. I don't care how postmodern they are or whatever, how much Foucault they spew or Judith Butler and these other people or Adorno or whatever. When it comes down to where we are right now, these theories have not moved the needle. Nothing. They have not impacted the Democratic Party. They have not impacted the Republican Party. Okay, the most we can say is that these theories have done the most negative things in the world in terms of exacerbating the prison industrial complex through pathologizing and criminalizing black men. And I think that that's what needs to be said, is that these people are just talking, they're pontificating, and that's about the extent of it. Okay, I'm doing the stream later on Baltimore and their condition. And the reality is that for the last 30 years, and I'm being generous, these perspectives have not touched black people in any substantive way. And we have to continue to throw that in their faces. And that BLM is the paradigm that has shown us that these theories have failed the litmus test of the real world. They talked all this stuff up until the advent of BLM, the black lesbians, the queer feminists. They tried to take their theories and apply them to social concrete situations, and they utterly failed.
Yeah, so let me just say this shit. Look, and I'm going to go on for a little minute, and then we're going to watch the video and respond to some of the shit that he's saying, right? Okay. But ultimately, there's an ideal out there, and it was started by the women who basically formed the Combahee River Collective. And they kind of echo what Michelle Wallace said. And of course, Michelle Wallace came along and recanted some of the shit that she had said that didn't age well about the black macho, right? And the myth of the superwoman, okay? But anyway, they come up with this idea that if the most oppressed group of persons are free, which of course are black women, right? Then everyone else will be free because they will have then eliminated all systems of oppression because they're impacted by them all, okay? And my first response to that is, okay, you assume that the ways in which oppression is carried out is fixed. So all you got to do is eliminate them for you and then they'll just be all gone. It's absolutely, in terms of theory, even on like a deductive level, if all we're doing is theorizing, that should be apparently just false, okay? Because oppression is protean. It changes, okay? It moves around like a bubble in a carpet, okay? You stomp it out in one spot, it moves into another spot on the carpet, and it appears as something different but similarly harmful. It's like a virus that alters its DNA to prevent a host immune system from being able to recognize it. It never rests, okay? So the idea that there is a means by which, you can end depression once and for all is quixotic. It's absolutely ridiculous. And the second point I've always made is connected to the first point, which is that those who promote the idea that if black women are free, then everyone else will be free, it assumes that black women are oppressed by all systems of oppression and are seated right in a position of so-called situated knowledge such that they can identify every single system of oppression imaginable. It gives them some sort of fucking deified epistemological standpoint. That's absolutely ridiculous, man. And that they're impacted the most severely by all these forms of oppression. Well, if that's the case, then let's talk about mass incarceration and why no one wants to really actually deal with the empirical facts. Let's talk about black male death. Let's talk about the school to prison pipeline. Let's talk about, all of these structures of oppression. So the idea that, okay, because I belong to a category of persons who are supposedly oppressed, then, in an additive way, well, I'm more oppressed than you because I'm this, and this. I'm a black lesbian woman, so I'm more oppressed than you are. We've already refuted that shit. Jim Sedanius has refuted it with his social dominance theory. I think Tommy Curry has convincingly refuted it by demonstrating that, look.
Anthony Lamel, Athena Matua, yes.
So many people have said, look, oppression doesn't work the way that you're theorizing it. And it's about method. What is the methodology that we're using? Are we merely theorizing based upon categories like Aristotle? Or are we actually studying black folks or studying like people, populations of person and where they actually fit into the social dominance hierarchy? What the fuck are we really doing here? Are we studying history? Are we studying genocide studies? Like, what the fuck are we utilizing as a heuristic in order to determine systems of oppression as a whole? What are we actually fucking doing? Or are we just, go ahead, man.
Let me just make it simple. The fundamental assumption is that if you remove sexism or misogyny, if you remove homophobia and transphobia, if you remove disableism or disability, whatever you want to call it, somehow or another, that is going to lead us into some utopian paradise. Mm-hmm. And that is utterly false. It is utterly, utterly false. Right now, if we take them seriously, if you eliminate sexism, transphobia, and homophobia, black people will still be at the bottom of this society.
Absolutely.
That's the reality.
But we need to add to this. When we talk about these kind of black post-structuralist, post-Marxist, post-modernist approaches to theory, what we fail to acknowledge is that a lot of this shit was laced with subculture of violence theory. You know what I mean? When I'm talking about, especially black approaches to cultural studies theory, a lot of this stuff was rooted in subcultural violence theory, and it came through feminism, black feminism. And this is what was so crucial about Tommy Curry's analysis of that, because what he was saying was when these feminists pulled from racist scholarship about black men, they codified and authorized, they almost used their status as authentically black women to justify this racist scholarship. So by the time you start to build a postmodernist framework out of that feminism to try and explicate how we can be liberated from all of these things, how does that work when you're fundamentally tied to the ideas black men are monsters? Black men remain to be the problem. This whole notion of exploited patriarchy somehow initiated by black men who don't have any power over institutions, who don't have any power over anything that can invoke any of this in a structural manner, somehow still remain the face of the problem in the black community as far as these intersectional feminists are concerned. None of that shit works.
But here's what they do. Because black men don't have institutional power, don't have structural power, don't have economic power, the only way that they can somehow gain that power is by lashing out against people who are perceived as weaker than themselves. So they become savage, sexist, rapist, abusers, or transphobic or homophobic. Okay, they terrorize everybody else because they're disgruntled with their own kind of, their own lives. So, it's like, okay, well, I can't live up to the patriarchal norm, so therefore I'm just going to start mimicking, as much as I can, the savagery of white folks, or even, become hyper masculine and toxic and just start lashing out at everybody around them. But the sociology belies this as a truth. Okay, that's just a fucking theory. That's none of these people that come forth with this shit about, black men being savage, rapists, abusers. None of them do empirical analysis in order to demonstrate or to prove any of it. Okay, that's the problem I have with this shit. So it just assumes the narratives that were started by clanspersons, man. you know,
There you go.
by deep racists. And it just picks up and carries the narrative on. And it might take, you know, a different tack, or it might appear, or, you know, a little bit different. It might, you know, look a little, it might be clothed in a different garb, but essentially it's the same shit. And you got people like James Baldwin, who comes out and says that, you know, like the image, the portrayal, the understanding, the definition of black men has always been wrong in American society. So what we're confronted with is this idea that black men are what white people say that they are, what white women say that they are. Right. We got a fucking issue with that shit. So if Kimberly Crenshaw is using Catherine McKinnon and Andrea Dworkin as a means by which to posit the attitudes, the inward springs and desires of black men, I call bullshit on that. I say that's bad faith. That's fucking bullshit. Fuck Catherine McKinnon, man.
And what it is, at the end of the day, is a white nationalist discourse. A white nationalist discourse that is no different from what we got in 1915 with W.E.B. Griffith and Birth of a Nation. Okay, that's it. And all they did, and I will say this until I'm blue in the face and I'm dead and gone, is that they revived Alice Walker and all her cohort. They revived that whole psychology, worldview, and ideology that was perpetuated by white nationalists in the 19th century, moving all the way through the 20th century, so that we became more villainized. We became the villains of history, and we are the villains of history, as though white people, white men have never, ever done any atrocious acts in the past or the present. That's all I got to say, brothers, and I will check you all out later. Take care. Peace.
Peace out, man. And another thing, I think he just said white men, but also I want to implicate white women in this shit. Like,
of course.
Come on, bruh. You mean like white women weren't part of the colonial project? Like white women weren't part of the slave-based project? Like they weren't participants in the proliferation of the super predator narrative, right? Like they weren't contributors towards or the catalyst for lynchings and castrations of black men? Come on, man. Let's just keep this shit a buck, man. But we're not keeping it a buck. All we're doing is talking about toxic masculinity, which, again, toxic masculinity is a fucking term that was coined by men in the mythopoeic fucking men's movement, bro. It had nothing to do with the concept of hypermasculinity and predatoriness. Like if you want to look at the genealogy of the fucking term, okay? Which was supposed to be about men moving away from capitalist structures, moving back from or pulling back from political structures and bonding with each other over atavistic concerns or some bullshit like that. Now, you can talk about the merits of it or not, and I think we had a discussion about this earlier, but the narrative is just getting fucking old, man. Look, if you want to claim that men in the space are sexist, cool. Fine. I'm pretty sure that there are a lot of sexist men in the space. But God damn it, you think that there are no sexists in the feminist movement?
Right.
Anti-misandric sexists? You saying that none of them are, man? That all it is just women resisting against hegemonic discourses, which are trying to make them implicitly accept submissiveness. That's all this shit is? Well, come on, bro. Like, come on, bro. You motherfuckers can't be this naive.
No,
they cannot be, bro.
This is intentional. This is why they don't want to engage the debate, because part of the issue is if they can dismiss what we're saying over here as ineffectual and unimportant, they'll be successful. So this whole question, for example, on anti-black misandry, feminists don't want to talk about anti-black misandry. They frame it as a knee-jerk reaction to feminism, and they suggest that misandry is just some shit we made up to feel good about ourselves, but they're not going to look at the data. They're not going to look at the arguments. They're not going to look at the publications where we're scaling misandry and improving empirically how it functions. This is the benefit of going back to Errol Miller, going back to Robert Staples, going back to Jim Sedanius. This is the benefit to generations of black male scholars who've been arguing this for years, but they don't want to do that work. So it's easier to dismiss it as some shit we made up yesterday, and we're just incapable of dealing with the reality of feminism. But here's the part they miss, especially if you have a degree, right? Well, hell, at this point, if you've gone through K through 12, you've done it. Black feminists and feminist publications were required reading. Even if you weren't taking a women's studies course or a gender studies course, this shit is inescapable. If you're educated, especially if you're Black, and if you've dealt with Africana studies, it's a foregone conclusion, right? You had to deal with this. But works by Black masculinist scholars or Black male studies scholars, you'd be hard pressed to find them because they're systematically ignored.
Yeah, nobody's read Robert Staples. Motherfuckers have had to read Audre Lorde, Kimberly Crenshaw. They've had to read, a whole litany. Motherfuckers have had to read Michelle Wallace.
Yes, it's required reading. Bell hooks.
You had to read that shit, bro. Look, I've read Mapping the Margins, and as far as I'm concerned, what it is three things at one time, man. Number one, it's a call for Black women to be allowed entry into corporate spaces and corporate structures or academic spaces.
Right.
Number two, it's an apology for the enhanced surveillance and criminalization of Black men related to rape and sexual assault and domestic violence. And three, it's a call for recognition. It's an advancement of the politics of recognition, which I think in the end, look, it's a Hegelian argument, man. Like, people need to be honored and respected and, treated with dignity or whatever the case may be. Look, bruh, I don't have to love you, man. You don't have to love me. I don't have to honor you. You don't have to honor me. The only way you get honor is through relationships with people that are real, right? And you come to know them and come to honor them as being a member of a community. Look, all this shit, man, look, what is the recognition actually changing in terms, like Dr. Neal said? What is this recognition actually doing other than creating tokenism, bro? Is it changing the basic structure of the society? Is it changing the corporate structures and institutions of this society? Is it changing the legal institutions? Is it changing the political institutions? Fuck no, it's not changing anything. We still got economic inequality, the material conditions, which is what Marx is supposed to be talking about, right? The material conditions. It's not fucking moving the needle at all. So the point is, where are the avant-garde Black thinkers, man? Where the fuck are they, bro? I don't see any anywhere. And these people don't want to have dialogue. They don't want to engage in dialogue. All they doing is scapegoating and making Black men the fucking boogeyman. And like Ishmael Reed said a long time ago, man, you act like we are the repository of evil in the world.
Right.
Like it ain't Black women out here doing scandalous and violent and ignorant shit. And not to say that there aren't Black men who are doing this shit. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of Black men who are doing this shit. But we ain't the only ones, bruh. But that's the point, man.
But the question also comes down to, how do these institutions, how do these policies, how do they relate to Black men and women and how we engage one another? And that's one of the critical points that we sidestep. Yes, Black men do evil shit. Yes, Black women do evil shit. But there's an incredible difference in terms of how these institutions invest in that. So again, if we want to talk about the Family Court, you want to talk about Violence Against Women Act, we're gonna, even though we know that abuse is bidirectional in the Black community, we can continue to talk about these things day in and day out, and you can see that the way institutions play into our relationships, there's one demographic that is affirmed or given access to resources that the other demographic doesn't get. And when those resources and policies are leveraged against Black men, it really begins to tear down relationships on a whole nother level. And so this is one of the reasons I'm frustrated with intersectional feminists, because they don't want to be realistic about those differences and what impact that has on relationships after decades of this kind of dynamic. But I'm also upset at these people that want to come in now and say, well, it's time for Black men and women. We got to get along. We got to, and there's this attempt at neutralism, right? As if there have been equal representations on each side of the argument about this. But the reality is, Black men have been fucking silenced about this shit for decades. They've been silenced. And it's only recently that they started coming out. So that's like, you got somebody kicking your ass for 60 years and you finally defend yourself and strike them back. And somebody says, okay, we need to calm down. Everybody needs to own what they've done. And I'm like, wait, no, fuck you. These black men have been silenced and dismissed from the goddamn discussion since for I don't know how long. And you want to come in here and act like the shit ain't been happening? I don't accept it. And that's one of the things I find disingenuous about this conversation. You're going to tell black men to shut up, be quiet, and work hand in hand without acknowledging. This is something BGS called out 3 or 4 years ago. There needs to be an addressing of grievances, because those grievances have been materially imposed on black communities, and most particularly black men and boys. It's not an arbitrary difference. It's not an ideological debate in a classroom. These are differences that have been entrenched in policy. And there are those in the community that benefited from those policies at the expense of men and boys. And we're going to act like it's not happening. I've already seen people trying to dismiss BLM's abuse of black male death for their own advancement as just something one person did. And I'm saying, no, this is coming out of a continuum of perspective, a continuum of behavior in regard to perceiving black men as disposable resources at best.
Yeah, it's like, but their response, like I forgot what paper it was, but Dr. Curry made reference to it where even in death, you become privileged because you're visible. There's a patriarchal dividend that you reap because you're male. So one of the reasons why you die as much as you do is because you're perceived as more valuable. And then not only that, the attention that you get over your deaths is related to your valuableness. Instead of regarding this shit as black male porn, like black male snuff porn, which is what I think it is. Like every season you get to watch some of it on TV. You get to see it. You get to see a public lynching. The effect is the same, but it's clothed in a different kind of garb.
It's disingenuous bullshit. Because I remember when this stuff came out, when you had the hashtag, what was it? Remember her name, right? First of all, part of the issue when it came to death, particularly at the hands of police and vigilantes, is that you had 200 to 300 black men killed per year, and that was a conservative estimate. Meanwhile, you had 9 to 13 black women killed per year by police, right? This is documented. You can go check the Guardian newspapers, the counted web pages. You can check the Washington Post. They did several years of listing the deaths by name, face, and situation. And the reality is black men were dying dozens more. It was, if you just did the math, there were about 20 to 30 times more black male deaths at the hands of police. Just police. We're not even talking about vigilante violence. So when you talk about men were being privileged because they're remembered, no, it's just that you had way more deaths. And those deaths, like you pointed out, were happening on camera. They were happening on camera. But here's the twist to it that I always pose to people and they never can seem to answer. Yeah, we may remember 1 to 2 black men killed in a year. But 9 times out of 10, when you ask somebody to point out black men have been killed, they go back to the last 6-7 years and they point out maybe 3 or 4 people. But the reality is, if you got 200 to 300 people dying per year, how many of those black men are remembered? How many of them do we know? How many of those stories can we tell? Go through the counted on the Guardian website and look at all the pictures that died, black men that died in 2015, 2016, and you'll be amazed at how many you never even heard of. It's not rooted in privilege. It's rooted in frequency.
Yeah, and then, like one of the first things, that we have to just admit, slavery for the most part was a male phenomenon, man. Like 2/3 of the slaves were male, man. You have to start with that. And it's not because men are valued more in relation to, they're respected more. It's because men can move more fucking widgets, man.
Bruh, I got
they can cut more cane.
Bruh, I got 3 degrees in Africana studies. I never once had a professor acknowledge the number of men versus women.
Then not only that, if you look at, like, all you got to do is look at history and genocide studies, and you'll see that conquest, for the most part, is a phenomenon where it's a male against male phenomenon. Mm-hmm. It's just, it is what it is. Like, we have to just suspend all common sense in order to accept Marxian heuristics and, this whole oppression, this critical theory stance on additive concepts of oppression. And it's like, man, how long is this shit gonna last? Like, you think that, like, first of all, if you're a scholar, you should welcome critique. If you theorize in the academy, you should welcome critique. You should falsify your theory in terms of sound methodology. Not go around trying to confirm it with piecemeal or patchwork, scholarship. You should try to falsify what it is that you assert. Make a bold and a risky prediction about a matter of fact, and then go out and see if the theorizing actually obtains through the process of falsification. But no, what we got is a whole bunch of fucking literary and fucking English professors and shit and philosophizers making theoretical proclamations about reality by using deductive logic and shit like that. Based upon like crack, to be perfectly honest, man, post-structuralism is crackpot philosophy to me, bro. I mean, I'm not saying that there's no element or truth to it at all, but I mean, the idea that everything is mediated through language, like who the fuck, like even in linguistic studies, who the fuck is taking Saussure, seriously, bro? Who the fuck is doing that, bro? Nobody is doing this shit. Not even in linguistics, man, contemporarily. But because that shit was the rage in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, now you got all these motherfucking scholars who are coming out utilizing, secondary literature, probably ain't even read the source material for real.
Oh, they haven't.
Not at all, especially in cultural studies. I guarantee you these motherfuckers ain't read Foucault all the way from beginning to end. They haven't read anything other than shit that confirms their biases related to the truthfulness of the theory and the way that it actually explains how humans interact. And nothing critical about the shit at all.
No,
nothing.
It is. And I do want us to get to the video, but I do want to also say, though, I think that's the purpose, though. I think at the end of the day, part of the reason, and this is something I noticed even when it came down like to Ford Fellowship grants and whatnot, the only people that could get it were doing this abstract post-structuralist, postmodernist kind of work. But if you were doing something on the grounds, grassroots, it was much more difficult, right? And I think part of the reason for that is advocating for this type of faux theoretical approach to shit. It obfuscates the issue, and it creates a buffer class of intellectuals that serve as the mouthpiece for issues, but it keeps society from actually having to hear from the quote unquote unwashed masses, right? So you have this buffer class of ideologues and intellectuals that prevent the discussions coming from the bottom from actually being heard. And that's what I think the purpose of this is. It's a lot of confusing and cherry-picked pieces of philosophies jammed together to prove a point that they preconceived prior to even engaging in the works that they're reading. That's the way I see it. It's a very there is a political purpose to this, and it's not to actually liberate, it's to confuse and to deflect from the realities that people are living in, most particularly when Black males actually start quantifying their experiences. Go ahead.
So let's look at this video, man, because we'll be here all day, man. All this shit is just preliminary remarks. This ain't a fucking seminar. This is not a class. This is just real talk amongst men who basically, have grievances, which I consider to be legitimate. We're raising questions, which it should be done. If you're a fucking academician, you should raise questions. You should have arguments. There should be dialogue. It should be in a public space where there are ideas being exchanged back and forth, and let the force of the better argument or the better research win the day. But that shit ain't happening. It's just an echo chamber of woke motherfuckers who I consider to be sleep like Rumpelstiltskin or some shit. A bunch of woke ass Rumpelstiltskins acting like they know every goddamn thing. And it is elite as a motherfucker, man. And they not moving the needle on progress for nobody. All you get is a few tokens. You get a few token gay motherfuckers. You get a few token trans motherfuckers. You get a few token black women. You get a few token black men in certain spaces. And there never is a change in the material conditions for black folks in the fucking United States, bro, or anywhere else for that matter. You know what I'm saying? It's just a whole bunch of abstract, elitist jargon using graduated terms in order to make a commentary about what the reality is according to the socialization of human beings. Like everything is mediated through language and fucking performance. Like, come on, bro. Man, it's more to gender than just fucking linguistics, narratives, discourses, frameworks, and scripts, man. Look, one of the ways that I know that it's a difference is, related to gender. If it was the case that the only thing that you need to do in order to be socialized into a gender is that you need to be scripted into, or like put it in a certain discourse to accept a certain idea about what gender is or isn't, then why trans motherfuckers taking hormones and shit, bruh? Huh? Why if you want to become a trans woman, you need to take some trans woman you need to take estrogen or some shit. If there's nothing against nature, if there's nothing in nature that pushes back against our discussions and conversations and our scripts, right? Then how are you able to justify the altering of your body? You should just be able to meditate on a fucking framework or a script, and it should result in the changes that you desire related to how you think about gender and yourself and how you identify it, right? There's no biology in gender studies, because of course that would disrupt the whole concept of performance and shit like that. I'm just, bro, man, the academy is some bullshit, bro. I'm just gonna keep it 100, man. I'm just gonna keep it 100. The academy right now is full of shit. But anyway, I want to do some housekeeping before I get to this video. Troy Warren, shout out to you, bro. Appreciate your donation. Black Quizzer ADOS says, exactly, Dr. T. The way they speak is elitist. They use theories like trading cards and they jump between different points to confusion. It's asinine. Okay. Uncle Stu, the old man on the block, says he's showing love and support. Giyagami, he says tuition for the session. Indigo Flow, shout out to you. Oliver Gray, shout out to you. Brother Charles II, shout out to you. BGS Ibmore, shout out to you. Let me see, man. There's some other people here, man, who've contributed. Black Quizard again, he says, Bad Faith is a podcast run by Brianna Joy Gray, former Bernie Sanders campaign manager. She recently had him on, and he mentioned you guys. Motherfucker, you ain't got to mention us. Just come talk to us. Right now we mentioning you because you speaking on us. But all you got to do is pull up. Have the conversation, bro. And we can talk about this shit. Anyway, Jamfar777, no Bad Faith is the podcast. So now we getting back to the bad faith shit. Black Quizard ADOS, thank you for becoming a member. Timothy Blewett, shout out to you, bro. Life of Commerce, shout out to you, bro. I appreciate it. Cameron87, shout out to you. He says, big ups to Dr. Johnson, Neil, and Gigi. Keep bringing the truth. That's Black Quizard again. He says, he's aware of you guys. He was on a podcast, so we already we already been through that road, man. So shout out to all y'all, man. And also I want to get in No One. He says tuition. Appreciate the, support, man. Appreciate the support from all you guys, man. So anyway, man, let's get into this video, bro. I'm going to make myself a little bit bigger than you so we can actually see the video, okay? Okay. And then we're going to comment on it as we go along. You tell me to stop when you feel the urge to say something, and then we'll critique what it is that he has to say or agree. Because some of the shit he says I agree with, some of the shit he says I don't agree with, okay? So let's move. We go to the main topic.
He'd admit is that he is obviously conventionally attractive, which amplifies other elements of his appeal to a wider audience, both.
So anyway, he's talking about beauty privilege here, and he's talking about a member of the white manosphere, I assume, some dude named Hassan, not to be confused with T. Hassan Johnson, okay? Just saying that. So we coming into the middle of this here. I really don't want to hear what he has to say about the white manosphere, but what he is saying about white guys is that this way of thinking can actually contribute to real world violence and mass suicide killings and shit like that. So we recently saw Brittany Cooper make a similar kind of argument, right? That this way of thinking actually contributes to or promotes the proliferation of violence. So, because men feel entitled to things, and because of their male privilege and the entitlement that they feel that they should have, they don't get what they want, and so they lash out. Now, to me, that's just a really simplistic way of looking at what the fuck is actually going on, and unfortunately, when men often commit suicide. Sometimes they commit suicide and they take other people out with them. So to me, this is a mental health issue. It is connected to race when it comes to white boys. But I do want to make a point about this. Look, man, how many black men you know have committed mass suicides, bro? How many, bro?
Yeah.
How many, bro? And black men in the manosphere are not in any shape, form, or fashion advocating for the mass suicide of any segment of any population in relation to gender, bruh. Not trans people, not gay people, not lesbian people, or any other kind of polka dot people. At most, man, all black men in the manosphere are saying, at worst, is basically leave these motherfuckers alone, bro. Right?
But
that's all the guys are saying, man. Like, look, leave these women alone and develop your own agency. You can consider it to be MGTOW, if that's what you think about it, if that's what you want to reduce it to, okay. But the reality is that a lot of shit can go wrong in this culture right now related to black men. You can get a charge for domestic abuse. You can get a charge for rape. And we already know the history of black men and rape charges and abuse charges. We already know this, bruh. And coupled with the fact that if you look at the social scientific literature, man, there's hundreds and hundreds of studies demonstrating that women in intimate partner relationships can be just as violent, if not more violent than men.
Right.
We already know that the demographic with the earliest sexual debut of black boys.
Right.
Who's fucking the black boys? They ain't fucking themselves.
Older girls and women. Yeah. Older girls and women.
We already know that the most raped demographic in this country, if you connect it also, if you add prison rape to the mix, is who?
Black males.
Black males. And you can say some of it's self-imposed, whatever the fucking case may be, but it's a problem and nobody actually gives a fuck about the problem, because the only way we can conceptualize rape or sexual assault is by means of the penis, you know, somehow being forcibly inserted in a woman. But we don't talk about forcible rape with men. We don't talk about made to penetrate rape with men.
Exactly.
We don't talk about statutory abuse of boys.
Right. Or prison, prison violation. Yeah.
We don't talk about that shit. You know, and like prison rape is a joke nowadays.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Like it's some funny shit.
But let me say this though, if you're gonna if you listen, and it's just a rule of thumb for those who are listening, if you hear anybody assessing male behavior that isn't talking about a study related to actually interviewing and engaging males, it should already be a question mark for you. You know, anybody pontificating on why men do what they do, but they're not citing any studies, they haven't conducted any studies, they haven't actually interacted with men. They're just making these statements from a sky level looking down. That's it. It should already be a question mark, just as a rule of thumb.
So, yeah, I mean, you know, and this is not to say that some men in the manosphere are not sexist. That's not, man. Look, in fact, when you talk about like traditional roles amongst men and women and what men are supposed to do, what women are supposed to do, who's progressive in relation to homosexuality and shit like that, man, it's a lot of studies that have been done that have demonstrated that black men are even more progressive than a lot of black women. Okay? One of the things black men get called is gay by black women. Oh, you're gay. Or who somebody gonna come get your bussy or some shit like that. Like we get responses like that when we talk about issues related to black men and boys. Like we can't even discuss it. Can't even talk about it without getting insult. Oh, you're dusty, you're crusty, you're trash. Oh, we got the feds watching you. Or some shit like that. I'm like, man, okay, that's how you think. That's how you feel. That's really the response. We go, you know, you like it in the bussy. That's the kind of shit we get, man. It's absolutely, and women are doing this shit. You understand what I'm saying? So it makes it even more perplexing and more ridiculous. But let's keep on with this shit. And you stop me when you want to stop, Doc.
Male, female, queer, straight, poly, non-binary, whatever tags you identify with. If you are attracted to men, you're probably attracted to Hassan.
Hassan is probably the most attractive.
So I guess my first would be Hassan.
I think that he has a very nice body.
I guess Hassan's the hottest.
He's cute.
Oh.
He's really good looking. I've seen him. Oh my god. Oh my.
And Hassan is just really, really super, super hot.
I just want to be his friend, dude. I just want to know him.
I just want to suck his dick, dude. That's all.
Why did you make Will watch this? This is like terrible.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
Part of this is because Hassan is close to what sociologist R.W. Connell would call ideal hegemonic masculinity. Yeah, so we're going into the theory and history part of the essay. So if you don't care about the actual foundational knowledge about the shit I'm about to talk and just want to hear me shit on Gary Vee and other manosphere figures, go ahead, skip ahead. It's in the description, but you're not going to learn any new big words. I've said the term hegemonic a few times in this and other videos, so it's really important that I probably give some context to explain that. The term hegemony is a really significant term in the world of critical theory and comes from Italian Marxist philosopher Antonio Gramsci, and is basically a concept that explains how society and culture and the state dominates the frameworks through which we understand and see the world, and also how we expect the world and society to work, look, and function. Gramsci states,
what we can do for the moment is to fix two major superstructural levels. The one that can be called civil society, that is the ensemble of organisms commonly called private, and that of political society, or the state. These two levels correspond on the one hand to the function of hegemony, which the dominant group exercises throughout society, and on the other hand to that of direct domination, or command exercised through the state and juridical government.
cultural hegemony and hegemonic thinking is really the bane of so much socially ingrained injustice that seems to be impossible to avoid no matter your identity. It's what causes comments that say man should never order fruity drinks, or that a woman who has a good job has masculine energy. Like the whole conversation right now about unions and about whether or not people deserve a livable wage is a hegemonic concept ingrained very much here in America, that somehow people that don't work hard enough should starve to death. That's an ideology we don't question, we just kind of take as true, as an axiom. That's what hegemony does. It gives you ideas that you just take as fact because that's the way it should be, without thinking about the fact that we kind of get to choose what is and what isn't in our society. And there's a Foucault quote in there somewhere about the panopticon and Durkheim on organic solidarity. This next section is going to be full of, look, I read the old white folks books stuff, so just bear with me. Hegemony.
Okay, so I'm stopping it there. I don't have a problem with what he says about hegemony and the way he defined it. Look, the best way I can explain hegemony is as follows, okay? It is, I would compare it to Marx's concept of self-alienation, okay? Are you there with me, Doc?
Mm-hmm.
And self-alienation basically refers to the way that people are estranged from their human nature owing to the class-based structures of capitalist societies that they just accept, okay? And you're self-alienated when you support, you endorse, you defend class-based structures that work towards your own economic or material disadvantage. For example, if you're a poor person from the lower class and you support something like supply-side economics, okay? And I talked to you about that earlier. And we all, if you don't know what supply-side economics is, it's basically an economic theory that puts forth the notion that tax cuts for the rich will result in increased savings and investment capacity,
right,
that'll eventually trickle down to the masses in a top-down way. Right. And hegemony is similar to that, and it basically asserts that hegemony exists when you have individuals or populations of persons who accept scripts or narratives or discourses that work against their own self-interest, okay? It's a tacit or an implicit acceptance of a script, a discourse, or a framework, right, that just seems natural, but it's actually arbitrary, right? At least that's the way it's posed, okay? All right? That's the way it's posed in the literature, okay? It's a critical theory term, okay, developed by Antonio Gramsci. let's keep pushing, man. So
Wait a
I
minute,
really
wait.
don't. Go ahead.
Let me add this. There's a relativity to hegemony that he's not talking about. So like if you deal with black folk in the academy, you're only talking about a percentage, right? But out of that percentage, over 20,000 more faculty that are female than male. The presence of feminism as the only widely accepted gender framework that's considered, viable and worthy of use is the primary way that these things are dealt with. So that said, what he's not acknowledging is you can have a hegemonic approach to this within a black cultural context that is overwhelmingly alienating when it comes to black men or black male studies, or even how the manosphere is interpreted within the academy. He's not acknowledging that that same hegemony that he's talking about conceptually is actually applying in the space that of what he's about to critique in regard to the manosphere, but it's playing out in terms of even how black male academics have to function in this space. And so there's just a sliding relativity to it that I don't think he's engaging.
Yeah, my whole view on anything that comes out of the academy is this: everything can be critiqued. Yeah. Every thought, every study, every thinker, every politics, every epistemology, every moral theory, every political theory, all of that shit has to be brought under critique. I don't give a fuck if it's a gay person doing it, a black man doing it, a black woman doing it, a white man doing it. Everything has to be amenable to critique. There's nothing sacrosanct in reference to scholarship. No, none of it. Everything has to be brought under the purview of critique. That's my viewpoint, okay? And when something becomes so sacrosanct that you can't critique it at all, that to me becomes a hegemonic discourse in and of itself. And I think that's kind of what you're speaking to, right? Because there's nothing that pushes back against the discourse, because the discourse is perceived as justice in and of itself. Those who don't accept it wholeheartedly, or those who offer any critiques to it at all, are perceived as misogynistic, sexist, transphobic, and how many other negative epithets can you throw out there? Look, it may be sexist, it may be transphobic, but you have to entertain the critique and debunk the critique on its own merits.
Well, and you
just labeling it with an epithet and saying it's some fuckboy shit, it ain't enough to work, bruh.
But
it's not enough.
But especially if the terms being used are being used to deflect from actually having to deal with the arguments being pushed, that's where you actually have a problem to me. So if you're going to call an argument or a person espousing an argument misogynist because they don't agree with you, but you're not going to address the argument that person is putting on the table, then what exactly is the purpose of the slander? What exactly is the purpose of the use of the term? It successfully deflects from what we're supposed to hear is valued by many of these intersectional feminists and post-structuralists, the discourse, right? The discourse is everything. The discourse is what people are supposed to be adhering to. It actually deflects from discourse using these kinds of critiques and dismissive tactics.
Well, that's just a fallacy in argumentation. It's an ad hominem. When you don't entertain somebody's argument and you just call them a name, that's just ad hominem shit. And I don't look, I'm from the black community, man, where motherfuckers cap on each other all day. I'm from the hood. I'm from Kossuth and Fair, bro. We cap on each other all day. But if that's what we resorting to when it comes to black thought, that's all it is some signifying monkey shit. We capping now? That's all we doing is like joning on each other? Mm-hmm. Come on, man. That's some bullshit. But anyway, I don't have a problem with what he said about hegemony in terms of an idea and a definition of it, okay? Now I just want to see how he begins to apply it, okay? So let's push on with this, man.
Hegemony is very much socially constructed and thus is subject to change, meaning that we agree as a society that, dreadlocks are not professional. We'll come back to that in a second. even though there's no explicit reason to think of how someone wears a hairstyle as indicative of their ability to work a particular job. But sadly, many people treat social constructions such as hair and fashion and gender as immutable and natural things and will fight for them even when the fight doesn't really involve them in order to maintain a natural order, in order to maintain hegemony. This brings us to the concept of hegemonic masculinity, crafted by sociologist R.W. Connell with support by James Messerschmitt. Simply put, Connell took the concept of hegemony and expanded it to the performance of masculinity, i.e., what culturally idealized and prescribed features should a person performing masculinity have. Again, these things change from culture to culture, space to space, and time to time. Black men in America who are marginalized because of race still have a framework of masculinity within community that they adhere to and aspire to, and is different from what white men do or Latino men do, or what black men might do in other parts of the world, or what they did 20 years ago in a lot of ways. Even among
I don't have a problem with what he said there. It seems like he's saying that there's alternative masculinities. Okay, so I don't have an issue with what he said there. Okay,
something Connell acknowledged as well. Yeah,
because I mean, you can't shit on Connell. Like if you look at Connell, you'll know that there are alternative masculinities. Okay, south of the border, or in the global south, and even within the context of United States culture. Okay, even amongst white men. Okay, but we'll get back to this in a minute. But I mean, I don't want to say too much, man, at the current moment, okay?
Queer men, there's going to be nuances and a hierarchy around what a good man is and what a good man is not. And yes, there is a feminine counterpart, but this video is long enough. But it's basically pick me. It's not that hard to get.
Okay, so that's where I have an issue. He just talked about pick me's in a deleterious way, and we already know what is considered to be a pick me in the manosphere. It's like a woman who is basically desperate for a relationship with a man, and so therefore she's going to accept,
right,
by means of hegemonic masculinity, that submissiveness, because she's so eager to be in a relationship with a man. Okay? Now, here's the fucking crazy thing about it, right? When you start to talk about, and he hasn't even gotten into the black manosphere yet, but when you start to talk about a motherfucker like Kevin Samuels, right? Whom I'm going to consider is someone he would consider to be a fuckboy, right? When the women call into his show, what the fuck are they asking for? What the fuck are they desirous of?
Relationships.
But what kind of relationships with who?
Relationships with black men, heterosexual relationships, yep.
But with heterosexual relationships with black men doing what? Making what? Occupying what kind of social position?
Marriages.
Yeah. They want a high value man. I want a motherfucker making 100 G's a year. I want somebody who matches my corporate professionalism. And if he's not outdoing me, well, I'm really not satisfied with that.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. The argument is you got a whole group of men who women are demanding meet their qualifications or criterion for success in a racist capitalist social structure that is lethally most disadvantageous to black men, that marginalizes black men. And you got women demanding that men be able to play this performative, dominant kind of masculinity. And Kevin Samuels comes back and says, well, why the fuck do you want a man like that? What's wrong with you being with an average dude who making between $45,000 and $60,000 a year?
Especially when she demonstrates nothing beyond average herself.
Like, why do you even want somebody that's making that type of bread? Okay, that's the type of dude you say you want. That's the type of nigga you say you want, right? Okay, what type of woman does that nigga want? You want an upper middle class or upper class man? What kind of performance, if you want to use the language that they use, what kind of ideals or norms is he going to have in relation to having a woman? Robert Staples already went on, he wrote about this shit in his book about the myth of the black matriarchy.
Yeah, he did.
He talked about this shit. if you're going to deal with a person who's upper middle class, they're probably going to be embracing of the so-called hegemonic masculinity. They're going to embrace that shit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not, right now, I'm just describing reality. I'm not putting any norms out there, okay? But that's the norm, right? It just is what it is. And I think Stables, man, he articulated this shit perfectly. If a dude is making a shit ton of cash in the corporate world, he's not going to want some, basically loud boss bitch ass woman.
No.
He's not going to want that, man.
He wants cooperation. He wants femininity. And even though Staples didn't use the exact terminology we're using, he did use terminology that was fairly close. And this was like 1979. And he was saying the same thing then. They want cooperation. They don't want a bunch of argument. But one other thing about this I do want to add. Something he said just a second ago struck me, where he was like, there is a feminine counterpart to this, but that's another discussion. Again, you can't critique feminists. You can't critique women. You got to valorize them at every stage of the game.
Or infantilize them and shit. Talk to them like one of the things that was said in the Combahee River Collective is that the women want equality. They don't want to be pedestalized. They don't want to be, treated as submissive. They want to be treated as equals and just that. But when you talk to women as equals, the first thing they do is they talk about your tone and the way you say shit. And you shouldn't say it like this. And maybe if you said it like that.
None of it has to do with the argument being posed.
And men are like, fuck that. Like, wait a minute. You said you don't want to be infantilized. You don't want to be pedestalized. You don't want to, be talked to condescendingly. Well, here's the talk. Here's the upfront talk the way men think. Now, you can talk about it in relation to a discourse, a narrative, a script, whatever the fucking case may be. But, black men, by the way, are raised and reared in fucking capitalist, neo-corporatist cultures in America. It is what it is. And black women are as well. And black women oftentimes demand the sort of shit that they eschew, that black feminists eschew in particular. It is what it is. Well, so now we reach this complex, problem. It's very problematic as far as I'm concerned. So you want the same shit that at the same time you're decrying. You want a boss ass man, right? This boss ass man who making this boss ass money, right? You say that's what you want, but you want him to not actually be a boss. You want this motherfucker to, actually be conciliatory to you, more equitable to you, more understanding of you and what you have to offer. But goddamn, cooperation works two ways, bro. That's all I'm saying, man. Cooperation works two ways, bro.
Well, part of the problem, though, is people like this don't want to acknowledge that whether you're talking about the manosphere or whether you're talking about Kevin Samuels in particular, you're talking about something that is in response to something else. See, the disingenuous dismissal of the manosphere is that these sexist men got together just because they woke up one morning and they hated women. They're not acknowledging that this is actually a discussion unto itself that came about in response to decades of maligning and the diminishment of black men and men in general. It came in response to those practices. So when you point out in terms of dating, right, even growing up in the 80s, we used to hear this shit. Niggas ain't shit. You need to make six figures to even be worthy of talking to me. Like when you grow up in that kind of framework, how exactly do you criminalize the response to those kinds of maligning tactics, but you don't address the actual maligning tactics in the first place? You don't talk about the context for what established a response 50 years later. It makes no sense. It's a disingenuous way to address the argument as to why black men are speaking up the way they are.
To me, it's, the whole thing is this. We live in a consumer culture where people attach value to being able to buy a bunch of bullshit or, name brand shit or to live a certain lifestyle, right? And I just think black folks need to be more worried about class and, social economic materialist concerns more so than they are. It seems like we're fixated on the politics of recognition and identity politics at the moment. And all it does is elide into tokenism. We're not actually moving the needle on materialist change, which is what the fucking so-called critical theory is supposed to be about anyway. Mm-hmm. I mean, so you got a few motherfucking gay people on TV, you got a few trans people on TV, you got a few black women on TV, you get a few black men on TV, but what the fuck is that actually doing to change the material conditions and reality of the bulk of black folk?
No, it doesn't.
And we live in a country where like 1% to 2% of the population own over 60% of the wealth. Black people are behind in the wealth gap. And we talking about recognition and who gets face time and visibility and invisibility and privilege, like black folks are privileged and shit. But anyway, man, or black men in particular are privileged. But let's keep going, bro.
Foundational concept that I want to bring up is what Connell calls the patriarchal dividend. This is a fancier way of saying the material or psychological manifestation of male privilege. All men, and yes, that includes not just white, but BIPOC, queer, trans, etc. men, benefit on some level from our patriarchal system, some obviously much more than others. No matter how much they align with women, no matter how they vote, no matter the various other intersections through which patriarchy may also hurt them, within a patriarchal society, there will always be a continuum of privilege between men and non-men.
Now this is why I'm like, prove it. This here's why I'm saying prove it. Because this is where theory just establishes a fact about the world and it doesn't have to prove anything. It's just like, okay, well, all men are privileged by patriarchy because masculinity is privileged in and of itself. So, okay, we'll demonstrate that that's a fact. How do you begin to do that? And this is where, conversations about black male privilege come into play.
Right.
Okay. And that's where I think you can come in and answer some questions. Like, what's up with this black male privilege shit? Because the first time I came into awareness of the concept was somewhere around 2012. Not to say that I hadn't heard it to some degree earlier, but I couldn't really actually believe it. I'm a black man who has actually been to fucking prison, had guns pointed at me. Okay? Have been alienated from one of my children. Because the woman wouldn't let me see him because you don't have to see her if you don't do what the fuck I say. Okay? I'm thinking to myself, what the fuck how is this privilege?
Right.
How does this amount to privilege? I don't get it. I don't fucking understand it. I didn't understand it then. And the same person who issued the fucking the statement to me was that I was privileged because I had a penis was a former man, a white motherfucker, who became a woman and who basically is able to participate in women's bicycle fucking races as a woman and win them and get awards for the shit. And has a job as a tenured member of a fucking university. And this motherfucker's telling me, and I ain't even have a fucking tenure track job at the time. Okay? And this motherfucker sitting here telling me how privileged, and I'm from the hood. I don't know where this motherfucker from, but it didn't look like they was living the broke life to me. And I'm hearing privilege. I'm like, what the fuck is this shit? Are you serious?
Well, a lot of the stuff that they define as privilege is really amorphous. Like if you check out Jewel Woods' black male privilege checklist, this is what a lot of them refer to. Right. So, I can choose my race over my sex in political matters. I have the ability to define black women's beauty, by European standards. These really amorphous things that really often aren't framed with any kind of empirical framework. Right. Because if we actually started talking about employment, we actually started talking about income or wealth. We actually start talking about incarceration. We start talking about the top 10 causes of death and the number of black men and black women that die at certain things. If we actually start talking empirically about the things that matter, then it's a whole different conversation. But if we can deflect the conversation over shit like who's represented when we talk about death, and I've already debunked that, that's how a lot of this conversation continues to go on. I actually wrote a response to Jewel Woods' piece because this was bullshit. But this is what they trot out to justify the downplaying of black men and the argument that black men have some kind of privilege, right? So, even things like I have the privilege of believing that feminism is anti-black, right? What the fuck does that even mean? especially when the average feminist, the average black feminist at that, won't even acknowledge that anti-black misandry exists. You know what I mean? But you can have these kinds of flippant statements with no kind of data behind them to serve as an argument that justifies the, and part of the reason that this happens too is because you do have a dearth in number as far as black men present in the academy. I mean, if we look at the degrees from 1976 to now, black men literally have half the degrees black women do. I mean, literally. So we're talking about a lack of presence. We're talking about a lack of presence in regard to these arguments. So basically, you got a lot of feminists, mostly female feminists, and some male feminists who are smaller in number, who basically are in there agreeing with each other and writing up things that have no qualification. Look, I've told this story. I had a feminist come to my campus and give a presentation on black male privilege. Her evidence was a picture of Snoop Dogg with a leash around a woman's neck and an argument about black men eating the big piece of chicken. This is from a full professor giving a presentation to mostly black women. They gave her a standing ovation, and her only two pieces of, I'm sorry, there was another piece of evidence. She argued that black men didn't have to deal with hair discrimination. Those were her three arguments. And this was somehow justification for the existence of black male privilege. But when I asked one of the students after, tell me, what is the evidence of white male of privilege? What is the evidence of white male patriarchy? She gave me a list. She ran off 10 points just off the top of her head. Home ownership, representation in elected officials, income, wealth. She named off, and she chose the most empirically measurable metrics that she could find. And when I said, okay, now what's the evidence of black male privilege and or patriarchy? She said nothing.
The big piece of chicken, Snoop Dogg with a woman with a collar on, and what else did you say?
Hair discrimination.
Hair discrimination.
Because black men have been filing lawsuits, especially in regard to military and police service, since the 60s and 70s. But here's the thing. You talked about this a few weeks ago. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure you did. You talked about how one of the main pieces of evidence that many of these feminists try to use to justify the argument that black men have power over them is a physical argument, which is one of the reasons that they keep reverting to arguments about abuse.
Yeah, I did say that. I mean, basically, look, here's the facts, man. Dominance feminism is a part, it has been interpolated into intersectional feminism, man, and intersectional politics. Look at Map in the Margins and see if Kimberly Crenshaw doesn't make a reference to Catherine McKinnon. Okay? And dominance feminism basically is that women's inferior societal position to men's can be attributed to men's effort, a concerted effort, like a collusion to subordinate and control women. Okay? That's the point. Okay? Now, how do you go about establishing the inward springs of men's desire to control and to subjugate women, right? Especially black men. Like, I don't see the fucking evidence. I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't any men like that. That's bullshit. But also to say that there aren't any women who do the same kind of shit in the black community is ridiculous. That's what we're saying. When black men in the manosphere talk about the gynocracy, we're talking about women's absolute control over the stewardship of children. And black men having to play uncle daddies and shit like that. Because the court system has basically predetermined that the best interest of the child is to be with the women in the formative years of their lives. That like men are like, they need to provide some sort of financial component, but in terms of the nurturance and the educational component, they're better off with their moms. Okay? So you got a lot of men in the manosphere like, man, I love my child, but this woman is running interference for me seeing my kid and shit. Like, what's up with that? And then you start to, complain and to talk about it. The first thing they say, well, parental alienation is not real. It doesn't happen.
Right.
We've proven and demonstrated that doesn't really actually, women couldn't possibly try to prevent men from seeing their fucking children.
Right. And then when you look at the effect of it, in terms of some men reach a point where they not only get tired of fighting, but don't have the resources to fight legally. Oh, you know what some men do? Some men go start another family. And the way that that's framed is not in response to her hyper access to resources like the family court that she can leverage against him at her whim. It's interpreted as deadbeat dads. So he's a deadbeat because he can't continue to fight her. Really, he's fighting the family court on her proxy, and she's a proxy for it. He can't actually compete with that. So he goes to form another family, and that's dismissed as his failure and his unwillingness to love. Right? But we can't enter that as part of the discourse because the only fucking people in position to have the discourse are overwhelmingly feminist, and they don't want to actually frame women as being problematic. There's very little point that where those feminists are willing to engage women as problematic beings, as human beings can be. And part of the problem with that is it leaves us with a one-dimensional conversation, even though I would argue feminists actually have a serious issue. One could even argue they tend to hate women more often than not. And the reason I say that is because they don't like the choices women actually make. They want women to function in a way that women don't always function. Hardcore feminists do not like that women want to get married. They don't like that women are willing to negotiate with men for things of that nature. You know, because women don't always follow the feminist line that they're supposed to follow. So there's a lot of contempt for women and feminist theory, but you can't have those discussions because one of the rules is you can't critique women and you can't critique feminism. Most particularly if you're a male feminist, you have to toe the party line and shut up.
Dude, man, you can't be in perfect agreement with anybody. I say this, man, all the time. You can't even be in perfect agreement with yourself. Your own views are subject to revision over time, right? Like this. Look, I'm just tired of motherfuckers virtue signaling and grandstanding like they're on the side of justice completely, all together, when, you know, much of this shit, you know, is just a narrative in a hegemonic discourse itself, right? That hasn't even been falsified. It's just a bunch of theorizing based on categories, Aristotelian categories, because that's what Catherine McKinnon uses. Aristotelian classifications in order to determine the essence of women qua women and men qua men. Okay, I just find it to be. I think it's bankrupt, and there's no real demonstrable proof for the shit. It's just a presupposition that motherfuckers run with, and not to say that men don't dominate. I mean, but the reality is, and this is why I say, if you look at racism for what it is, it's primarily a form of anti-misandric aggression.
Exactly.
That's what it is at its core. And the most lethal effects of racism are directed towards men, outgroup men. Okay? Just look at the historical archive and you'll see that that's the case from culture to culture throughout the annals of time. Okay? Not only that, there are stereotypes and caricatures about outgroup men that are used by both men and women who are part of the predominant group in society, or the so-called hegemons, or, you know, the people who are the superior race, or whatever the case may be. Okay? They're always going to caricaturize and stereotype the outgroup men more so than they'll do any other population. And it's not because the men are privileged and there's some sort of privilege being allocated towards masculinity, so we need to keep our eye on them. It's because the threat of resistance exists most strongly in the male population. The biggest threat exists within the male population, right? So, I mean, if you are a critical race theorist, and I know Kimberly Crenshaw coined that term as well, but, you know, a clock on the watch can be right 2 times a day, even if the motherfucker's off, okay? But the whole point is, look here, bro. Black men consistently have to navigate through troubled waters. And what we don't need is the enhanced disrespect, the enhanced stereotyping and scapegoating of black men with the utilization of sub-violence narratives about the essence and the ontology of black men and their adoption of this so-called hegemonic masculinity. Because if you look at the literature on it, man, one of the most progressive groups of men in relation to relationships, in relation to women's access to jobs and professions, they are black men. But we'll get more into that later, man. Let me keep pushing through this shit, bro. Hold on. Because we can't stay on this all day, bro.
That is the patriarchal dividend. But the thing is, for some men, especially men who clearly are very close to the aforementioned masculine ideal, aka someone like Hassan, or some of these men can often feel like what they're getting isn't what they're really owed, that they're not getting enough of that patriarchal dividend. They feel like they're doing the right things, performing masculinity in the appropriate way, upholding the appropriate values, but they don't see the results they believe they're supposed to get. They're not getting the job. They're not getting the girl.
See that?
Go ahead.
See how, just real quick, you see how he splices in little images of black men as if that black men are actually significantly part of that argument?
Yeah, I saw that. That's the editing of his. He got a white editor, I think. White guy who edits videos for him and shit.
Hey, man, but at the end of the day, you approve what comes out. So it's either a part of your argument or it isn't, right? And he's kind of implicitly tying black men into this argument on the low. But continue. I just wanted to point that out.
Right. So let's, because I got some shit to say about this hegemonic masculinity and the patriarchal dividend as it pertains to black men. But let's
They're
go
not
on.
getting the respect. There's a specific feeling that comes from this that sociologist Michael Kimmel calls aggrieved entitlement. And I want to quickly mention that Kimmel, who is one of the more prominent figures in masculine studies in sociology, has in the past few years had his own rash of accusations of workplace bullying and sexism, the irony of which is not lost on me. However, his work still stands as some of the more insightful academic texts in the studies of masculinities. Quick aside, none of the great thinkers that provide us with some of the more important academic theories are without fault or with bad takes. Bell Hooks had more than a few bad takes on black men that did not age well and really hated Beyonce. Like, was not a fan. W.E.B. Du Bois was a proponent of eugenics later in his life. And Karl Marx was a fuckboy. So stop deifying the theorists. You should just rock with
Gigi. Huh? How you gonna say in one breath Bell Hooks had some bad takes and really had a problem with Beyonce? Bell Hooks actually publicly stated that the Central Park Five were guilty. How exactly do you downplay that to talk about fucking Beyonce? See, this is the disingenuous shit I'm saying. That was a black feminist version of a critique of a feminist. He took Bell Hooks, he kind of laid out that, well, there was some problems there, but she really had a problem with Beyonce. That's a critique, really? You know what kind of racist bullshit she supported by making that public statement? And that's the way you're going to characterize Bell? Man, that is so fucking disingenuous. It's ridiculous.
I think Bell Hooks more than anything else supported the subcultural violence theory, as does Kimberly Crenshaw, like Curry pointed out. And then not only that, she said some things, man, about the hypersexuality and hypermasculinity of black men that, she's a fucking English professor, dude. Mm-hmm. A literature professor.
Right.
Making statements of fact about the world without actually having to go back and to prove any of the shit. And that's the problem I have with this kind of scholarship. And I don't have a problem with people theorizing. Theorize. Make hypothesizations. Make them. But then go back and demonstrate that what you're saying or articulating as a matter of fact about the world actually obtains in the world through methods of scientific inquiry or naturalistic inquiry. That's all I'm asking for. I'm not asking for a lot. But anyway, let us continue with this shit. Let us keep pushing.
Theory as much as it is useful to us. And so that's what we're going to do here. Kimmel describes aggrieved entitlement as a sense of shame and frustration and eventually rage that comes from men who feel like their patriarchal dividend has been denied in some way. He states,
that shame and humiliation underlie basically all violence. Because I feel small, I will make you feel smaller. In my interviews with extremists, both actives and formers, I have found time and time again that they've experienced that sense of humiliation and shame. At least in the case of the German, Swedish, and American guys that I interviewed, sometimes it is not really political at all. Many of them, especially the American guys, were sexually abused, beat up, bullied as children. Some of them have basically the same sort of profile as the victims of Catholic priests. Growing up, they were deeply ashamed of themselves. They didn't do well in school. They didn't have friends. They were sad, miserable, and they escaped into themselves. That just made them better targets, and the far right drew them in.
I'm going to interchangeably refer to aggrieved entitlement and main character syndrome because they're kind of the same thing. It's just one was said.
Now, do you notice what the guy said that he kind of glosses over? Aggrieved entitlement conjoined with the idea that a lot of these boys were abused themselves. They don't say who abused them. They don't say what kind of bullying, who bullied them, right? It's the same shit that like queer folk complain about. It's the same shit women complain about, right? But of course, implicit within this abuse and implicit within, the bullying is that there are other men that's doing it. I'm not saying that that's what's actually said, but it almost seems as if that is what's being said, okay? Now, if it's the case that some of these boys have been abused, it could be that their abuse has made them become imprinted with, the idea that that's how you operate in the world. And when they explode in a violent fashion because they have had acts of violence enacted against them. Nobody even thinks about this shit, right?
But you know when they demonstrate an understanding of that very point? When women are found to have done something egregious. When a woman has killed her children or her husband, especially it's husbands or boyfriends most particularly, when a woman has killed her mate, her partner, or whatever, much of the time, the first response I hear, particularly from feminists, is I wonder what he did. He did something to her, or the outright assumption that he abused her, right? Or that she even grew up with abuse. These qualifications come out readily when it comes to women who commit atrocious acts. But when men commit atrocious acts, it's just their masculinity.
Yeah, they accepted a hegemonic masculine discourse, and so that caused them to issue, or they have aggrieved entitlement, so therefore they act out in a way commensurate with their expectation, and the expectation is that they're supposed to have access to sex and submission from women, and so therefore that's why they're violent in the world, which is reductive, which is simplistic, which is, basically, as far as I'm concerned, it's not socially scientifically sound. It's some fucking bullshit.
And it's
like it's not a study. It's not a serious study of people.
But it's dehumanizing, and that's the part of it that often gets left out. It isn't scientific, but it's fundamentally dehumanizing. But that's okay as long as it advances the right people, and those just don't tend to be men. But go ahead.
Let's keep pushing with this shit. Let me just keep going.
By a big sociologist, but you get the gist of it, I hope. I'm bringing these concepts up because they are fundamental and really important concepts for explaining and exploring the manosphere from my perspective. The manosphere is a loose network of mostly online communities and media entities with a wide variety of ideologies and styles and arguments, but all of them agree with one major core tenet, which is that modern men are in a state of crisis, and 9 times out of 10, the next thing they'll say is because of women. And before I get into all the ways in which they're wrong about many things, I want to point out as a whole that these men...
Stop this shit here. So you mean to tell me that, that's not what feminists are doing? And haven't been doing in the academy and in public policy and law schools and shit? They haven't been doing that shit for like 60 years?
If you take the presupposition that women are inherently right and you mix it with that Victorian age notion that they're inherently good, then of course you can come to this kind of conclusion, right? You don't even have to think it through. You don't even have to hear the argument that many of the brothers in the manosphere are putting onto the table. You don't have to hear none of it because you've already presupposed that women are right because they're inherently good. It is what it is. That's one of the disingenuous parts of these feminist arguments, right? The presupposition is still there. No.
That's hold on. I got to turn the volume up. Okay. Look, man, I say this all the time. I'm going to say this again. You can't bifurcate the world into a binary and put women in the class of the proletariat, put all men into the class of bourgeoisie, and then say that all men are oppressing all women. That's dominant feminism. I just don't feel like it's accurate, okay? This is not equity feminism. And unfortunately, intersectionality has absorbed the thinking of dominant feminism. And it's about power and control and exploitation and violence, okay? That's what dominant feminism is all about. But here's the kicker. dominance feminism doesn't really work well with the whole concept of hegemonic masculinity.
Okay.
Because hegemonic masculinity or hegemony in general is people's tacit and implicit acceptance of their own self-interest. Okay, or something that works against their self-interest, right? It's the tacit acceptance of something that doesn't work to your own benefit because it's a predominant script or narrative or discourse in society, okay? Now, if you have to work in order to control somebody through violence and hypermasculinity and through, like brutality, that's evidence that fucking hegemonic masculinity is actually not present.
Mm.
You get what I'm saying? So that it doesn't match up nicely. And one of the things that black feminists have said is, okay, because black men don't have access to structures and institutions, right? And they don't have these sorts of access to power, then they act it out by being brutal savages. That's what the white women like Susan Brown Miller said at first, right? And then it's interpolated into the works of Kimberly Crenshaw and people like Bell Hooks. Mm-hmm. And then you see the current incarnations of this shit in people like Brittany Cooper.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Who draw connections between, black men's so-called aggrieved entitlement and the motherfucking Mexican dude who just shot a whole bunch of kids in a school and the white dude who shot a whole bunch of people in whatever fucking state it was. I can't remember.
Buffalo. Yeah.
In Buffalo, New York.
But here's the thing, though. You can actually make those kind of statements about black men and men in general and connect it, to violence without having to ever address the violence. I mean, Brittany Cooper dismissively says, well, you guys aren't actually killing people, but you're still a threat. But she starts the conversation by referencing black men's proximity to the Buffalo, New York killer. So you this kind of not only disingenuous, but irresponsible framing, which is really not about irresponsibility. It's really targeted. Really, it is targeted, which is much like what we're hearing from Signifier. It's targeted in a manner that downplays men, but also at the same time criminalizes them simply by locating their argument near something egregious without having to qualify empirically what those relationships are. It's a disingenuous tactic unto itself that is intentionally targeted at undermining and underdeveloping black males, and most particularly deflecting from any argument that brothers have to put on the table.
It's a false equivalency, man. That it's a false argument by analogy. But let's keep pushing through this shit, bro. We got a little bit more to go. I want to get through it, man. We probably don't have to watch all of it, but I really want to get through some of what he's got to say about the black manosphere.
And are definitely correct to at least feel like something is wrong. Men of all races are in a state of crisis, and for white men, this crisis is made more complicated by the emergence of widely accepted critical theories such as postmodernism, intersectional feminism, critical race theory, etc., that are reframing the way we understand race and gender, slowly eroding at the hegemonic space of power for them for the first time in modern history. It's no wonder that you'll hear...
Bro, huh? Did you hear that, bro?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what the fuck is actually changing? Like, look, here's the deal, man. My argument is nothing has changed.
well, he's saying that they feel, and white men feel insecure because postmodernism is questioning as a society, we're questioning the things we took as sacrosanct not long ago. But your point
and look,
has empirically changed
in terms of material distribution and material dialectics. What the fuck has changed in the United States?
And where do black men find themselves in that material dialectics framework? Where are we?
I'm just saying, like, okay, so you got women in the workplace now. Okay, fine, cool, that's cool. Black women have always worked. Always, right. He'll say that. Like, black women have never been in a position to be, kept women. Like, they're like fainting couch women who exist in the domestic sphere, in the private sphere by themselves. That shit just never actually happened.
And to the extent, especially now, where you might be able to provide it and are willing to provide it, she will choose to work. How many women used to call in on Kevin's show and say they wanted to be kept housewives, but they still wanted to work? It is what it is.
I mean, all I'm trying to say is, look, man, nothing has changed, man, in terms of the distribution of wealth in the United States. If anything, what ended up happening was white women ended up hijacking the civil rights movement and got access to all the so-called booms that were supposed to stem from it. They just basically, like Bill Burr said, they swung their Gucci-booted feet over the fence of oppression and became the fucking goddamn recipients of everything that black folks have fought for. And black women, knowing this, and this is just a hypothesization, right? An assumption, you know, an educated guess, said, like, I can't remember the dude that does, the black guy that does sports, but he said, black women saw the direction that the wind was blowing in, stuck their finger in their mouth, put it in the air and said, oh, it's time for us to drift with these white motherfucking women.
Jason, what's his name?
Jason Whitlock. And a lot of black men feel that that's the case. Okay, I mean, and you can say the feeling is not accurate, but there are a lot of men who are beginning to see shit that way, especially after, you know, the proliferation of, you know, the mindset of the women from the Combahee River Collective, which I think is the black feminist Bible, bro. You know, it's like, okay, we got to look after ourselves because no one else is looking after us. We have to look after ourselves and look after our needs and our interests first. Mm-hmm. So then you get statements like, that's not true, coming from, you know, like the Queens of Soul and shit on Fox Soul, when Ice Cube says, ain't black women black people? Mm-hmm. No, that's not true. Mm-hmm. Well, what the fuck are you then if you ain't black? Well, I'm a black woman and we have special needs. As if black men don't have special needs. But when you talk about the special needs of black men, all of a sudden it becomes, oh, well, you can't do that because then you're, you know, promoting the patriarchy.
Right.
And this brings to mind another concept that I have about it. It's all about how you define patriarchy. In my viewpoint, patriarchy is a system of kinship in which powerful men form fraternal bonds with one another to thwart and stymie efforts from other men to overtake them. Now, women can be a part of the patriarchal process just like men can. And I think that white women are part of the patriarchal process and have been since the beginning or the inception of the, you know, the Americas. They've been there from day fucking one.
But Curry argues that the rise of feminism is part and parcel to Western patriarchy.
Of course it is, bro.
It's tied to it.
Of course it is. You know what Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony did to Frederick Douglass, man. Mm-hmm. The first thing they did was they was rolling with him, but then when black men were about to get the vote before they were, all of a sudden, oh no. Mm-hmm. No, you can't let them niggas have the vote before your mamas, your sisters, and your daughters. Oh no, not them niggas, because what they're gonna end up doing is abusing women.
But it was okay as long as he was pushing their agenda. So everything was cool as long as white women were being advanced, but particularly by Douglass. But when black men had access to the vote, then it was a problem.
Now it's time to bring in the Klan. Now it's time to start lynching. Mm-hmm. Okay? Now, you can call it what you want to call it. You know, men, you know, trying to exercise, you know, or push their way into hegemonic masculinity. But we know white women didn't like it. And that's the first wave, okay? Now, second wave feminism is a little bit different. I'm not going to get into that right now, but let's just keep pushing with this.
Let me just ask you a quick question. Which wave of feminism opposed being protected militarily by mostly men?
Say that again, just so I'm clear on that.
Which wave of feminism opposed being protected militarily by mostly men, most particularly in wartime? If there was any kind of aggressive factor on the table where Americans in particular might be under threat, which branch of feminism, which wave of it opposed military protection of themselves by mostly men?
I don't know none of them.
How many individual women you know look for relationships where men providing protection is not on the table.
I don't know very many of those at all.
So isn't it interesting how some aspects of patriarchy can be invoked without it being called patriarchy, but it's still invoked? But patriarchy is the worst thing in the world. But we still want protection. We still want you to provide. She could be making $300,000 a year. You need to make more than her for her to respect you. See, these little dynamics aren't really teased out. So women can ask for whatever they want, be it societally or on an individual basis with a partner they're trying to vet. But we can't call it patriarchy, but so much of it reflects the very same patriarchal idea that they're dismissing.
Man, I say full equality. If that's what it is, let's go all the way with this shit. Let's not hold on to the vestiges of patriarchy that work for the benefit of women. Let's get rid of all this shit altogether. Let's see some women out there with some M16s and some M60s and shit. Just like dudes getting it in the trenches. Let's get it. You know what I'm saying? Like let's let women take on risks just like men take on risks. You know, like let's not just have women jockeying for positions, you know, in the corporate world and in nice, you know, heated and cooled office buildings. Let their ass get out there on these goddamn construction projects and get out there in the trenches. You know what I'm saying? During these hazardous conditions and shit when it's snowing and power lines go down. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, hey, let's spread the risk.
Right.
Don't ask for the equality of distribution without also ushering in equality of retribution and taking on the equality of risk and the burdens that, you know, have to, because society has to place burdens on citizens. Okay? So let's stop with the whole called protect us shit. Fuck that. If you want equality, if we gonna go full tilt with this shit, let's get rid of all the vestiges of coverture and protection and provision. Let's get rid of that shit.
Yes.
That's all I'm saying. And I'm not trying to talk light. All I'm asking for is if we gonna do equality, let's do it, man. Let's not have, you know, let's preserve the shit we like and let's do away with the shit we don't like predicated upon our own norms and value systems of what benefits us. Fuck that. Let's be totally equal then.
But that's why they want to manicure the discussion. Because if feminists can stay in control of how patriarchy is dismantled, they can maintain the institutions and practices that serve them that are fundamentally patriarchal and get rid of the ones that they don't like, which fundamentally are just the ones that don't allow them to control the dynamic. So it's a cherry picking of patriarchy. But if you leave it to the larger society, if we take literally smash the patriarchy.
Yeah, smash that motherfucker all the way. Let's not keep on hold to some of it. You know what I'm saying? Let's smash that bitch all the way. Let's get rid of all that shit.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? We're gonna dismantle that motherfucker. Let's dismantle all of it. Leave no stone unturned. Let's scorch the earth with this shit. Once and for all. But you know, this is the problem with post-structural thought, critical theory in general. Like, critical theory ain't changed shit, man. And it doesn't have the power to change anything. It's just a whole bunch of rich academicians, motherfuckers from the upper middle class who drink lattes and shit at Starbucks, and they write in their fucking notebooks, listen to lo-fi hip-hop and shit. Which I like, by the way, and I have a channel that does it. You know, watch the shit from every now and then. That's a plug, shameless. But I mean, you know, what the fuck is changing, man?
Well, here's the thing. I'll just say this really quickly. When you actually watch the behavior of women, right? One thing they'll do is they'll replace male sacrifice and male provisioning with alternative male sacrifice and male provisioning. So whether it comes, as opposed to it coming through an individual husband, they'll accept it through a government institution. Sometimes they'll even accept it in sons that they raise to provide husband services in the context of their relationship, right? But it's interesting to see, right? So in one vein, you have this dismissal of male contribution while being replaced with other male contributions. But there's not a point where male contributions are completely eliminated. They just want to pick how it's.
You can't remove men from society. You can't diminish the value of men. And this is why I like Camille Paglia, okay? The street smart feminist woman. She's like, look, You have to understand that it's lower class men who keep the fucking infrastructure of this economy going, man. Who keep this shit rolling. Who's in the trucks driving across the goddamn highways? Who's cleaning up the toxic waste? Who's emptying the trash? Who's cutting the fucking grass? Who's building the office buildings?
Right.
Who's building the pipelines? You understand what I'm saying? Like, I mean, who's doing all this shit? Women are not doing this, man. It's just, I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't some women, because I'm an iron worker, bro. Like, I've actually built bridges and shit like that. And I ain't saying there ain't no women out there who don't know what the fuck they doing and can do the work, okay? But it ain't a whole bunch of them. I guarantee you 98 to 97% of the construction workforce is men.
Yeah.
And it ain't because women ain't allowed in. It's just like, they ain't going out there to get their weaves fucked up and get their fingernails fucked up.
I don't know. I think you may have saw it, but a year or two ago, we were covering the series that came out, Why the Last Man, and it's based on a comic book, and it's fictitious. And actually, it was a feminist that wanted to put it out. But one of the most interesting things about it, so it was a whole piece about if all the men died. And the whole society was on the verge of nuclear destruction because they couldn't find enough women that could manage the nuclear power plants, the power plants in general, the electricity. I mean, all the office building management, flying the vehicles like helicopters. I mean, it was completely interesting to see feminists reflecting on what would happen in the absence of men, and I think kind of against type, they were forced to admit everything would fall to shit. And it was interesting to see.
I'm for inclusion. Let's include motherfuckers in jobs that are risky and they result in high casualties and shit like that. Let's just not have women in corporate jobs and shit, which, you can argue there's a dearth of women there, but let's get motherfuckers everywhere. let's include them in all the workforce, not just the desirable and the light jobs. Let's put their ass in the heavy shit. Let's get it all the way in. Let's smash this shit all the way, man. Don't hold on to the vestiges of coverture and protection that benefit you. Let's get rid of that shit altogether. If it's a bump in the night, don't expect for me to go after that motherfucker. You go check it out. Take the gun with you. Take the blicky with you.
I wait here curled in the blankets, honey. You tell me how you went.
Act like Coop on All American. Get your ass out there and check it out. Put that work in. Shit. That's a reference to the All American show I'm watching. I just started watching it. You got a butch girl. I don't know if that's supposed to be politically correct or not. I don't know. But she ain't a femme. She's more masculine in how she, performs in this series. And shit. Put work in like Coop. Fuck all that shit. All this old damsel in distress shit, let's get rid of it. I'm done with that. If that's how y'all want to play this shit, if we gonna smash this shit, let's smash this. But anyway, let's keep...
They keep advocating for dismantling the damsel, but when it comes down to doing so, they don't want to.
Just check this, keep pushing.
Of those philosophical movements I just mentioned as dangerous to civilization. For the first time in history, some white men have something they've never really had before. Fear of social repercussions, aka accountability. Between Me Too and cancel culture and camera phones, etc., white men for the first time have to at least think about the consequences of acting upon their racial and gender privilege. They need to make sure no one has camera phones when they throw their racist frat parties. They need to think about what they're going to say on live streams in case something gets clipped out of context. They need to make sure that the group text chats full of racist and sexist conversations don't have their real names on it. Now, in reality, all of this doesn't amount to a lot of real material differences for everyone else. Getting one or two white men fired from their job or embarrassed and dragged online for being racist is not really the revolution we've been working towards, and definitely not the great replacement that many white men seem to fear. But there's this old saying that when you're used to privilege, equity can feel like oppression. And that's what we see and get from so many white reactionary manosphere type spaces. They don't understand this feeling of essentially being racialized as white men and understanding that it means something that maybe it didn't mean just a few years ago. However, it's deeper than that. One thing that we need to be far more critical of is the fact that all men, including white men, are dealing with numerous challenges that have eroded at their mental, physical, and economic health over the last 30 plus years or so. Many of you probably are aware that white men account for a disparate amount of suicides in America, with some studies having them responsible for up to 70% of suicides in the States. In UK, men's suicides are over 3 times as likely than for women. And rates of suicide in the UK and the US have risen over the last 20 years greatly because of the suicide of white men. Suicide strongly correlates to social issues and economics and health. So white men notwithstanding, suicide rates for Native Americans, the disabled, queer, and queer youth are higher than any other population, which should provide some perspective on the real structural issues in our society.
Why did this dude didn't say black men?
Right.
Why didn't he say that?
Right.
Like, bruh, why didn't you say black men, man? So it's more gay motherfuckers, queer people committing suicide, man?
I mean, we just covered an article a couple months ago that was illustrating how black males are actually committing suicide much higher numbers, and he skips over that? I don't understand.
The study found that black males had the highest increase in suicide attempts compared to any other group. I'm looking at the Sacco Observer. There is a whole host of articles. I went on Revolt Television and did a fucking response, man. Like 85% increase in suicide rates for black boys, man, black young adults, black males. Okay? And you want to talk about queer motherfuckers? Like, I ain't got no disrespect for them, but come on, bro. Let's just keep it a buck, man. Like, we not actually keeping this shit a buck. No. And that's the issue, bro. And and really, there actually is no concerted effort to talk about health, the mental health of black men and boys. Because, first of all, you're supposed to be able to perform the so-called hegemonic masculinity. So if you tell your wife or a woman you're dating, look, I have a problem, I'm depressed. Suck it up. Man up. Why you whining and crying? Why you being a bitch ass nigga? Why is it all about you? That's the first thing that you get typecast as a bitch ass nigga. If you got any kind of problem. And we've had men in the black manosphere commit acts of suicide. Mm. And everything seemed to be okay.
Right.
Everything seemed to be fine and dandy. And the problem is, who's attending to the mental health needs? See, they say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Maybe it's too much expectations of dudes in this culture, man. Maybe there's no help. And everybody who's a male in this country ain't part of the fucking upper middle class, bruh. Not everybody is in these so-called privileged positions. I'm just saying, like, I mean, if you don't start to pay attention to the health needs of men, and you think it's all just about men oppressing women in some Marxian kind of heuristic, you're gonna lose the nuances and the crisis that men find themselves in contemporary culture. And men speaking about their issues. Look, you can blame it on women, you can blame it on feminism, you can blame it on whatever. We just talk about feminism from time to time because it's important to talk about narratives and scripts that, that don't ever get critiqued. Somebody has to critique the shit. Somebody has to say something about it. I don't care if you call me misogynistic or not. Fuck it. If that's the moniker I have to, if that's the epithet I got to deal with, so fucking be it, man. Who cares? Mm-hmm. I don't care. Because they're going to call you, you're going to get called out of your name anyway. No matter what you do. You know, my mom used to tell me shit, they're going to talk about, if they talk about you now, they're going to talk about you when you dead. So keep doing you, baby. Mm-hmm. But, it's a different kind of fucking environment we dealing with now, bro. But let me keep pushing, man, through this shit, man, so we can get
and how that erodes on our mental health. However, with those populations, I think we have some understanding as to why that's the case. We know why queer people and queer youth turn to self-harm in a society that constantly prosecutes them. We have well-developed understandings for these disparities.
This is just cap right here. I ain't saying that, queer people don't commit suicide and shit like that, but you got a lot of heterosexual black boys committing suicide, man.
Right.
But we got to stop and have a conversation about the queer folk. And how many queer folk are in the black community?
Right.
Tell us, Mr. Signifier. I'm just asking, I'm just saying, bro, let's keep this shit a buck, dog. Now it's the time for you to talk about how bad everybody else got it. The marginalized within the marginalized groups. This shit, it fucks me up, man. This is why I say, and this is a recent video. This is a dude, man, who has a master's degree, right? And I'm saying, where's your research materials, bro? What are you referencing, bro? You just talked about how men are committing suicide at 3 times the rate damn near everybody else, all men, but you didn't take the time to talk about black men and boys committing acts of suicide.
He didn't take the time to reference his own demographic. What does that mean? You're gonna prioritize 4 to 7% of society, but you're gonna sidestep your own demographic, the demographic that actually has the highest rate of suicide attempt. It just doesn't make any sense. But this is the kind of pandering and gesturing that we see happening when it comes to these feminists.
Bruh. I'm just, I'm not saying I'm surprised. I'm just saying, bro, come on, man. We got to do better than this shit, bro. You know what I'm saying? We got to do better than this, man. But you know what? We ain't going to do better than that. We just not. Because why? We got a narrative to push. It's just that damn simple, man. We have a narrative to push. We have a particular discourse that we want to talk about. So let's do it the way we envision it. Fuck it. It's just, it just is the way that it is, man. I mean, it is what it is, bro. So let's continue to go through this, man.
White men who occupy such a clear space of privilege in the US, and I'm sure in the UK as well, why is there such a disparity? Why are these boys and men killing themselves while at least on paper they should have way less to be concerned about? The data and research points to things like mental illness, substance addiction, as well as economic and social instability, and an absence of effective coping mechanisms, often exacerbated by an adherence to classical views of masculinity. Suicide among white men is more common in rural areas, which have higher poverty, as well as higher access to guns and lower access to quality health care. Yet, and you all know this, these same rural areas vote against any and all progressive policies that might help them because they, like most of America, are very conservative, because conservatism in America is part of the hegemony, at least in a specific demonstrable sense. And this is the enduring paradox of the crisis of men. There is a hegemonic hold that often has to be severed first, or at least greatly weakened, before boys and men are able to actually deal with the problems they all face, which is living as men under late capitalism, being the gears in a capitalist patriarchal system that benefits them, definitely, but also consumes them as fuel. Ian Danskin.
Okay. This to me is like, okay, how do you hang on to it the one time? We live in a post-industrial capitalist system that marginalizes you, but it also privileges you, but you end up fucking killing yourself. I'm like, man, this is the strangest shit to me, bruh. I mean, it's like just because you're a man, you have privilege in the system.
Right.
The privilege is a few men and women, but you're privileged in virtue of being a male qua male. So what we need for you to do is to drop, your performance of masculinity, become, put on a dress or some shit, and then shit'll change. Start fucking wearing fingernails and shit, and, wear some pumps and some high heels and shit, and maybe some shit'll change for you. Drop the masculinity and the stoicism, which damn near everybody requires of you, including the women. I even know feminist women, man, who are fucking assume that if it's some danger, you're supposed to step up and handle the shit.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Don't cry like a little bitch. Get your ass out there and do it. Even feminist women, bro.
Yeah. When it's convenient.
I'm just saying, bro. Man, let me keep on pushing with this dude, man.
Describes this in his alt-right playbook series, specifically on the video How to Radicalize a Normie.
Gabe has concerns like economic precarity, not knowing his place in a changing world, stressful working conditions. In other words, Gabe is suffering under late capitalism, same as everyone.
Pretty much all the things that are said there to be plaguing men, especially white men, can be explained through understanding the exploitative nature of capitalism and how men play a specific and important role in the maintenance of capitalism, a role that for the vast majority of them requires a traumatizing debasement of their sense of self and humanity. Men have to be the arbiters and vectors of patriarchal power. Patriarchy does not work with our support. We are the glue that keeps that machine together. But consider how glue is made. I'm reminded of Boxer from George Orwell's Animal Farm. Long story short, the animals are the proletariat and the pigs are the bourgeois, and you should really read the book. It's like 100 pages long. It's a good one. Boxer is a horse, and he is the strongest and hardest working of all the other animals. He neglects his physical health as well as his intellectual development to focus on his role of being the workhorse, which is an esteemed and valued role that brings some admiration and respect from his peers, even though as he works harder, he is slowly destroying his body. He does this without question because he believes that in the end, the pigs who have all the real power will reward him for his toil and dedication in the social order that he's helped build, that is impossible to create without his help. This is the plight of men right now. Much like Boxer, many men are intensely aligned and committed to the hegemonic belief system that their performance of their role in society gives them rewards and will give them their patriarchal dividend, will make them the main character of their story. And much like Boxer, they are guaranteed nothing, no matter what they do, unless, of course, they can somehow find themselves a pathway to the top of the hierarchy, which very, very few men of any race are capable of doing when they have.
Isn't that what I just said? So, like, how do you rectify that? We just gonna rectify material inequality by getting rid of fucking what? A hegemonic masculinity? That's gonna stop all this shit? It's gonna stop exploitation? I just don't understand it, bro. So it's the hegemonic masculinity that makes men perform like Boxer because they think they're going to get a reward or a cookie and shit. And then they find out that they John Henry themselves into their demise and they get nothing in return.
Right.
We explaining this not in terms of classical Marxian analysis, but now we have to explain it in terms of hegemonic masculinity. It seems like to me this is not making good use of Occam's razor. You're adding gender to this shit. Well, I don't even think it needs to be added. But the question is, why does society place such burdens on men in the first place, and why are men accepting these burdens in the first place?
Here's the key, man. We see grandfathers or fathers, grandfathers, and so on, who've worked their whole lives for folk, broken their bodies to sacrifice, and we're not observant enough to see that. We don't realize that that's where that goes. We just have to wait till we break ourselves to realize we've been lied to. It's way too simplistic, man. Dismissive and reductive.
So all we got to do is just get rid of, the hegemonic masculinity, and then everything, all the problems of exploitation in the workplace is just going to go away.
Mm-hmm.
Just going to evaporate and shit. Okay, I feel that.
To actually start from scratch. And the manosphere in various ways offers the false promise of fixing this problem, of making you a man so great that you'll definitely get the dividend you've always wanted. The promise of giving you a map to be the main character that you've always wanted to be. This messaging works because these boys and men, whether they're edgelords or good-looking petite bourgeois boys of relative privilege, feel the squeeze, feel the sense of existential dread, and they want to address it. They want to address what are actually the failures and limitations of patriarchy under capitalism with performing patriarchy under capitalism. So today we have men from Gen X, Millennials, Gen Z, and soon to be Gen Alpha, as the oldest of them are entering puberty and are going to start Googling shit on YouTube and TikTok. And they're going to be grappling with the concept of performing masculinity and fearing the possibility of failing at it and suffering numerous consequences, or succeeding and suffering other consequences. And that's one thing I also want to get across here, is that much of the manosphere historically and now is built upon a fear response. As boys, we fear that poor performance of masculinity can contribute to bullying and ostracism, which it does. As men, we fear that it will lead to low prospects for intimate partnership and professional success, which it does. Then for a lot of men who ostensibly do perform masculinity effectively, unless they are at the top of the food chain, they will still be susceptible to the harms of late capitalism in the form of exploitative and dehumanizing work, low wages, poor health practices, etc. And even those at the top of the top still have to contend with the erosion of their soul. This is the infected foundation underneath all of this nonsense that ties it all together and makes the manosphere seem to have such widespread reach, as it makes it possible for someone to start out just wanting to build some muscle or learn how to talk to girls or searching for their favorite anime character and end up arguing for things like enforced monogamy, sex redistribution, or that women should be denied the right to vote. The scary and
what the fuck?
Man, I don't know what that shit is, bro. Like,
what kind of leap was that?
Bro, like, I don't know what parts of the manosphere he's looking at. I guess he's still talking about the white manosphere, because I know he ain't talking about the black manosphere. I know he's not. Not making those kind of claims. Like, look, this is what black men have an issue with, bro. Real talk. And I'm just about to fast forward this shit to when he starts talking about the black manosphere, because I'm just tired of hearing this rambling about the white manosphere and how all of this could be changed if men just dumped off their preconceived notions of what men are supposed to do, which everybody requires of men to begin with, in which, to be perfectly honest, second wave feminism basically promotes as a fucking archetype as well. I mean, isn't second wave feminism about women's inclusion into the workforce and performing the same kind of shit that men are doing in terms of working and entering the labor force, but only, for those best jobs. I mean, the good jobs, right? It's like, get educated, go out there and be a part of the capitalist rat race. Be a neoliberal corporate cog.
But here's the thing.
In a big fat ass machine. Isn't that what it all is anyway?
But she has options. So she can work full time. She can work part time. She can not work at all. She can have kids. She can have an abortion. She can adopt. What options do men have? You can choose to participate or not. But if you try to be a house husband, you got to deal with the repercussions of that. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, it's still framed around the social expectation that men still play a role that we're dismissing while expecting them to play, but women all of a sudden have all kinds of options that they should be allowed. But the problem is, if you're going to have options, then there needs to be options for both. And if you're going to not have options for one, then how do you justify options for the other? And this is kind of what's inconsistent about this argument. You can't tell men that they still got to provide, protect, and do all the things that are expected of them, but she gets to do whatever the hell she wants to do with no critique.
Hard thing to.
Yeah, before I started it back, I hit the wrong button. But look, bro, I think that, like, any person allowing themselves to be exploited, and this is one of the things that men in the manosphere are talking about, period. Like, why sign up to be in a marriage or sign up to be in a cohabitation practice whereby all of these expectations fall on your shoulders, and at any moment, all this shit, the rug can be pulled from under you? Why engage in this shit? So men are saying, look, I can do bad. Like, women are saying, I can do it on my own. Men are beginning to say, fuck it. The cultural climate is such that everything is our fault. There's no culpability on behalf of women at all for anything. They're just like Mary Poppins or fucking Pippi Longstocking, kind of like doting around in the world. It's like aloof does and shit, you know, spreading goodness and Skittles and rainbows. And, you know, men are just trying to exert their patriarchal dominance over women by demonstrating in vain that they're real men. Like, I mean, dude, like at the end of the day, I think the answer to this shit is to have a more equitable distribution of resources. And therefore, if you don't want to fuck with a woman, you ain't got to fuck with her. You still have all you need. A woman ain't gonna want to fuck with a man, she ain't got to fuck with him. But the problem is that there aren't as many subsidies for women, men as there are for women. There's not policies put in place to lift them up as there are for women, especially black men. So this is, when you start talking about race and black men, a lot shit becomes way more complicated than, you know, talking about white men and, you know, their marginalization in society. We talking about a whole different animal. And so black men in the manosphere are just basically saying, look, bro, women are doing the same shit that they accuse us of doing. They're being abusive, but men don't really have a support system or a network system, even the believability that this shit is happening to them. And when it does happen to them, fuck it, they wanted it. Like Coolio having sex when he was what? How old? I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Like DeRay Davis having two grown-ass women about 30 years old, forcing them to go down on him.
Mm-hmm.
Like Lil Wayne losing his virginity and, you know, at 12 years old.
Yep.
Even if Baby did, you know, was the one who kind of pushed him into it, or, you know, like that shit is some normal shit. Let me keep pushing, man, because I want to get to this dude, man, and what he's talking about in the end of this.
Understand is that, like most social ills, the worst parts of the manosphere stem from a very valid and very universal sense of anguish in men.
Okay, cool. So we can, like I said, there's some shit that I agree with him on and some shit I disagree with him on. I just think he's being reductive when he places all the blame on this shit on, you know, some sort of skewed and fucked up notion of masculinity. You know, I just think that's reductive, and I think it's too in line with this, you know, like it's the world is fucked up, and it's because men fucked it up because they have a desire, you know, to fit in and to be on top. And they shouldn't have those feelings, and they shouldn't aspire for that. And they're the cause of their own undoing. I just don't like I don't like that spin. I just don't like that tack.
And we have to contend with and process this if we are ever going to seriously address how to fix the problems that the manosphere presents to us. Up until now, I've mostly been talking only about white men and boys. And while there is plenty of diversity in all of these groups, there are some distinct differences in what most refer to as the black manosphere, which has grown a lot in terms of visibility in the last few years with figures like Kevin Samuels and kind of Fresh and Fit. I'll get to that later. That said, the black manosphere is not new, and to be fair, at least on YouTube, it's probably been around a lot longer in its current state than its white counterparts. And I think it's important to like parse out some of these differences before moving on.
Hold on.
Like, I didn't know fucking Umar Johnson was part of the manosphere.
He's not, and he'll probably cuss you out if you said he was. No.
You know, like black nationalists or manosphere figures and shit like that. Like, come on, bro.
But this is the problem. Anybody, if you're a black man and you're on social media, particularly YouTube, and you make a critique of feminism, that somehow puts you in the black manosphere. Now, I don't even know if Fresh and Fit consider themselves part of the black manosphere. I don't know. But part of the issue is he didn't bother to find out. He assumed it because, again, they were black. They're on social media, and at some point or another, they critiqued feminism. Ergo, they're all in the manosphere. And this kind of lazy, deflective kind of approach to us, it really illustrates, you know, how little respect that he has for the space to even find out who the hell he's talking about.
There's a comment and a donation from Black Quizzer ADOS, and I think he kind of hit the nail on the head here. He says, he's basically saying, you feel anguish, but you're not smart enough to see that the hegemonic masculinity you're fighting for is what's caused. I gotta give him a bomb for that one, man. I think he hit the nail on the head, man. It's not a part of capitalistic superstructures, it's the hegemonic masculinity that's causing this shit. It's not capitalist exploitation, this is some gender shit. And I'm not saying, look, bruh, look, I'm telling black men in the manosphere, stop fucking trying to John Henry through the world and fall on the sword and to live up to the expectations of people who don't have your best interest at heart. Whether it's another man, whether it's a woman, whatever the fucking case may be. If it's your mama, your sister, your brother, whoever the fuck it may be. Doesn't matter. Stop trying to John Henry and alpha your way through the world and try to live up to somebody's expectations of what you're supposed to provide and do for them. That's my viewpoint. Okay, now it might not be commensurate with other men in the manosphere, but I'm saying, hey, look, man, you're a human being. Exercise some agency and independence like Dr. Neal calls for. Talk about and advocate for your own empowerment. But of course you can't do that because you're already empowered because you got a penis and a scrotum. So got to be careful of that, because, women are just falling so far behind and they're subjected to so much oppression and domination and violence and cultural imperialism and shit like that. I mean, so you can't really, the problem that black men have is that they have no voice and they have no ability to express their disgruntledness, their enemy, or whatever the case it may be, in a public forum where they'll be taken seriously. Okay, that's the issue. That's the problem. And then people say we have bad faith and that we're operating, under hegemony and we're using misogyny. No, That's not what it is, dog.
Right.
That ain't what it is, dog. It's just black men in this culture are getting a shitty fucking deal all across the board. Okay? And the extent to which we talk about it and discuss it and vent to each other about what the fuck we're going through, it becomes an occasion to talk about how regressive we are, how, stuck in the Stone Ages we are, how self-alienated we are, using Marxian or critical theory analysis or some sort of, postmodern, post-structuralist gender analysis. We're working towards our own undoing. And if we just accepted intersectional values and ideologies, then we'd be on our way to fighting against all systems of oppression. We'll eradicate them all.
But at the end of the day, by suggesting that these are either self-inflicted or delusional perceptions that black men have, there's no weight on any other group, let alone society, to be accountable for the history and the ongoing treatment of black men and boys.
My bad. Go ahead.
No, man, it's either in our heads or we're doing it to ourselves. All of that deflects accountability and it deflects the argument on the table. See, you notice he didn't actually address any particular argument, even the men he cited. He mentioned Umar, he mentioned Fresh and Fit, and he mentioned Kevin. What arguments did he cite from any of them?
Well, he's gonna use one. Just let's keep watching. Hold on. I'm gonna let it run for a good chunk of time this time. Hold on.
Because we want to keep in mind that these two groups definitely converge in some areas, but separate in others. Unlike his white counterpart, the black manosphere has the benefit of being able to subterfuge a lot of his elements under the guise of pro-black thought and political discourse. Many, not all, but many of the figures in the black manosphere present themselves as pro-black political figures and talking heads in conjunction with being male advocates. And they just happen to peddle conservative, misogynistic, and every once in a while homophobic rhetoric as solutions to the issues that black people face.
That's just false. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, but that's what I mean. That's precisely what I'm talking about. You can early on, he dismissed the manosphere by showing three people, dismissed them all together with a straw man argument. He fabricated what they stood for and then dismissed it and called it names. And then he did it again here, but this time he went into a little more depth to point out what they all do. But who the hell is he talking about? Who is he citing? He put a picture on the screen. I mean, again, this is ridiculous.
about to show Kevin Samuels make a statement, so let's look at Kevin.
Listen to anybody. We can't be pro-black if you are. How are you pro-black and not married? This is my issue with a lot of the pro-black movement, especially a lot of pro-black women. I need to see your husband.
The insecurities and frustrations for black men that attract them to the manosphere is pretty much the same as their white counterparts, except that those frustrations, the financial insecurity, the ugly breakups and divorces, child custody battles, etc., are all made a bit more complicated by structural racism. And along with that, because of structural racism, they also are dealing with high death rates, lower access to healthcare, and barriers to a lot of the ways that the manosphere preaches for seeking self-help. Historically, the nature of patriarchy has mostly excluded black men in a traditional sense. Black men as a whole have never fully encapsulated the patriarchal image of father knows best, doting wife, 2 kids, and a dog. Even those black men that did have those things were always still barred from the full essence of what that framework was supposed to offer in terms of respect and stability. You can be black and be the man of the house and the man in your neighborhood, but you were still going to be called boy when the police came around. Plenty of black men between the 1920s and the 1960s contributed to traditional male-centered communities and played roles as patriarchs in them, only for them to be burned down by white terrorist mobs. However, I would argue that more typically, the black manosphere grows out of conservative pro-black movements. As I alluded to in previous videos, older generations of black people who faced a more intense and overtly hostile world of racism and also bore witness to really ugly images and experiences of crime and violence from their own people in black neighborhoods were very susceptible to a line of thinking that said that black people's biggest problems was themselves, and that if we just rejected the uglier and negative aspects of black life and culture and focused more into mimicking what we saw from whiteness, that we would be better off as a people. And to be fair,
that's bullshit. That's basically reducing the black manosphere. And I'm not saying that there aren't elements of that here, okay? But I mean, to reduce all of the black manosphere to conservatives who basically argue that if black people are going to make shit happen, we need to have women, for the most part, being submissive to black men who are the head of the household and shit like that. Come on, bro. Like that's all this shit is.
Yeah.
A bunch of disgruntled black edgelords who want to exercise hegemonic control over black women in the community, man. That's fucking bullshit, bro.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
that's not what this is, bro. Now, it might be that for some of the guys here, but that ain't what this is about, bro.
Yeah.
If you ain't got nothing to say, I'm gonna keep pushing.
Yeah, go ahead.
This isn't wholly untrue. Being closer to whiteness has always been good for people of color. So lighter skinned black people with certain types of hair or phenotypical features or even names are historically much more likely to fare better in America under white supremacy. But as I alluded to in the edgelord video and other videos, crime and criminality is socially determined by poverty and lack in environment and structural barriers, and the ability of a handful of black folks to effectively maneuver white supremacy using what we call respectability politics is not a real solution to the issues that black people face. The core factor to crime in black communities is how these communities are designed and policed, not how the people behave or wear their hair or wear their pants. A good way to understand this is to look at something like the opioid epidemic versus the crack epidemic. When crack began to ravage black communities in the 80s, the response was tougher policing, longer prison sentences, and more police on the street, sending thousands of black men to jail for petty drug offenses. While they also passed laws that greatly criminalized the possession of crack in black neighborhoods, but barely criminalized the possession of the much more potent cocaine in white communities.
Reverend Cecil Williams thinks law enforcement crackdowns like the one just announced for Washington, D.C., sweep up the victims as well as the dealers.
There'll be warfare. We will see large numbers of poor people and specifically blacks going to jail and to prison, and they will not have a chance to live, to have a productive life. By 1995, more blacks would have gone through the criminal justice system. We're predicting 70% at this time, going through the criminal justice system. Now, I ask you, Isn't that the way
Pause this for me.
to completely eradicate a race of people?
But then as opioids along with meth.
Go ahead.
So he's dismissing the manosphere as a conservative space where he has to correct them on the history of the crack. I mean, are you serious? Look, man.
Hey, I mean, it's him that's doing it, bro. It ain't me.
This is one. Look, and Mr. Z in the comment section just demonstrated this, right? Shout out to Mr. Z. Shout out to Keep It 100. Shout out to brother Damon. Happy birthday. But here's the thing: the brothers in this space are as politically diverse as it gets. When I tell you, I have hardcore Trump voting conservatives. I got hardcore, black revolutionaries. I got brothers who are liberal. I got brothers who are apolitical. I got brothers who are Hebrew Israelites, Muslims, who are atheists. You know what I'm saying? There's the one common factor that these men have is that they're concerned about the quality of life for black men and boys, and they're interested in being able to understand and articulate what we experience in ways that we've not really been allowed to before. So to dismiss all of that with this one-handed gesture it's trying to debunk, conservatism is such a fucking disingenuous gesture in and of itself. It means you didn't even pay the space enough respect to acknowledge what the differences are, to acknowledge, to actually frame an argument that actually meets people where they are. You just dismiss the whole area of dialogue based on a generic difference that you think pulls the manosphere together. It's fucking ridiculous, man.
But that's, it is what it is, bro. I just, look, man, I'm at a loss of words about this shit, bro. I mean, you can't reduce the black manosphere to conservatism. I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't elements there and that this isn't a narrative that some men in the black manosphere push. But I've always been someone who talks about the egological and the socio-economic circumstances which give rise to crime and criminality and thugs. I did fucking entire shows about this shit. Now, whether you believed it or not, or, there is the Pookie and Ray Ray narrative out here. Okay, there is the respectability politics narrative out here, but it's not the only fucking narrative, bro. It's not. And it's not just about picking up women. It ain't just about trying to be an alpha male. We're talking about deep-seated and long historical injustices that have been directed towards black men and how to actually deal with them, how to actually empower ourselves when the whole world seems to be engaged in some sort of, invective against us, some diatribe. It's been consistent. Okay. How do we deal with it? Okay. The negative stereotypes and the caricatures, not only that come from white society at large, but that also come from black women, whether they be in the academy, the corporate world or not. Even those that come from ourselves, from other black men. So no, it's not just a conservative space with black men who are calling for black women to be pliant and submissive and to have, male-headed households and shit like that. It's deeper than that. But, it's okay to be reductive, I guess. When you want to make a point, you want to pigeonhole and put people into a category, it's cool to do that. But let's go.
Surged in white communities over the last decade or so, the policy response has been treatment and mental health services and deterrence programs and community engagement that don't ravage these communities. This is the difference between an addict in recovery moving on with his life versus a convicted felon who is unable to find meaningful employment after a lengthy prison sentence during which his community suffered in his absence, which also raises the possibility of recidivism. But a lot of people don't understand this, and so the strong sentiment in a lot of pro-black spaces is that the key to black liberation is the restoration of the black family and to align said black family with the traditional images of family normalized to us by the Western white world, aka hegemony. They don't recognize a system that will always find ways to take us out regardless of how well we perform whiteness. But because that dream is so enticing, a lot of enterprising grifters have constantly presented this idea of fixing the black community through the black family by making it look more like what we think white families look like, which of course often leads to blaming black women on not allowing black men to effectively lead, a narrative made very famous by the Moynihan Report from 1965. The Moynihan Report was a federal report by sociologist something Moynihan. Fuck 'em. In this report, which is a favorite staple of the black manosphere as well as black conservatives, characterized black men as infantile and lazy and uninterested in self-betterment, partly because black women emasculate them. As a cherry on top, the report, which offered no real solutions, gave one prescription that said that maybe these black men should join the army as a way to reclaim their masculinity. More on that in a later video, but just understand that this report came right in time for the Vietnam War. What a coincidence. This report has been lambasted.
Oh, and this bullshit. First of all, the report did talk about employing black men as one of the mechanisms for restoring the community. But even before he gets to that, man, this whole, when he says, you know, that this is basically grifters using the notion of improving the black family to improve the community, that's another assumption. And I'm not necessarily for or against it. I'm simply saying that there are brothers in this community that are very much concerned with uplifting the black community. There are those that have checked out. In other words, this is a syncretic space. This is a space where brothers have all kinds of different philosophies. Now, if he's talking about Kevin, he should say that. If he's talking about someone in particular, he should say that. But you can't say that the manosphere is essentially a nationalist space. It's not. And nationalists will cuss you out over that. Right? It's a space where you got brothers of all kinds of different philosophies, some of whom are nationalists, some of whom are SYSBM, some of them are an overlap of multiple categories. So yet again, he's oversimplifying something that he's claiming to understand, but he's performing this mostly for feminists. Because when you look at, you know, he's got damn nearly 300,000 subscribers. You don't get that high appealing to actually just studying black men. You get that high when you appease either black women or white men or women. That's where that goes. So this whole report, as it were, is about appeasing feminists by dismissing the manosphere, but he's not addressing the nuance of the manosphere by any means. And his use of Moynihan to dismiss us that much further oversimplifies what we're talking about and what we're referencing. Moynihan, we're not saying Moynihan was a great person. He was this. We're saying that Moynihan acknowledged that there were structural practices that undermined black men and in many ways helped to create a different reality for black men and women. But he was also one of the first to say that we actually do have to look at black women's behavior, because when you actually look at the dynamic, they made choices that other groups of women didn't make in regard to employment and in regard to relationships with men. But he's not going to go into any of that because that contradicts the group he's trying to appease.
Yeah, you know, yeah. I'm going to reserve my statements until we get through the rest of this, man. So let's go. It ain't that much more.
By a variety of black scholars for its complete absolvement of the constraints of white supremacy and the legacy of white terrorism on these issues that black people face in terms of their families in these communities, as well as its oversimplistic views on gender dynamics between black men and women. It's a report hated both by scholars who discuss black masculinity and by intersectional feminist scholars, yet it's a favorite of the black manosphere because it gives credence to the conservative talking point that the problem with the black family is black women.
Society, they did not expect to happen what happened. Go read the Moynihan Report and Moynihan Scissors. They did not expect to give government assistance and food stamps to the black community and for women to choose the check over the men.
You often hear black manosphere types talk about how the likelihood of a black child being raised in a single parent home has skyrocketed in the last 20 or 30 years. And this is true, but it's also true for every other race in this country. And it doesn't take into account all the other variables that decide whether or not a person is going to be raised in a two-parent household. What they really just want to say is that it's because black women aren't submissive enough. They disregard the well-documented structural barriers to black economic viability or the historical fact that black women have always worked, partially because their labor was more valuable on the open market at certain times in the last 100 or so years, versus black men who, even when not excluded from labor, did not have access to some of the more lucrative house caretaker jobs that black women ended up taking. They just run with.
Bruh, did this motherfucker just say, no shade, bro, that like working as the help, cooking pies and shit in Miss Ann's house was lucrative, man?
Compared to black men's labor, I hear what he's trying to say, but see, really, what he's doing is he's sidestepping Sedanius. He's sidestepping the reality of the treatment of outgroup males by suggesting that it was just merely a marketing issue in terms of why black women were more employed than black men, as opposed to looking at the structural barriers black men face. And so when black men are frustrated about these barriers, they're just, too stupid to realize that they're blaming the wrong people. That's essentially what he's saying.
And look here, bro. Like, look. Moynihan Scissors is a fact. Now, the interpretation of Moynihan Sisters, you could say he was erroneous or not. But the fact is, the expectation was that if men are employed, women's subsistence on transfer programs will go down. Because it had always been that way. It always worked in that way. Okay? Until you get to a certain time period in which black men had become more gainfully employed, but there wasn't the kind of parallel movement in the decrease in transfer of women's, black women's acceptance of transfer programs and, men's employment. There wasn't the same kind of dovetailing. The scissors came into play. Now, we can explain through a multitude of factors why that occurred, okay? But you can't deny that it's an actual phenomenon. The question is, how do you explain it? Okay? And you can talk about intersectional feminists and what they say about it, but most of them motherfuckers don't use any empirical data to demonstrate anything. And I forget the other group of people that he talked about. I really don't know. But the point is, much of this report was developed by the work of people like E. Franklin Frazier and Clark, whom nobody ever mentions. And, look, you could talk about, the myth of the black matriarchy. Robert Staples did that, man. I'm not trying to go into all of that right now. But the reality of the situation is this. There's been a report recently that came out talking about black boys' downward mobility, young black men's downward mobility. Okay? And one of the principal reasons...
work, yeah.
One of the principal reasons is what? Because black girls are not really impacted or affected by this shit.
Yep. Yeah.
But black boys, their success, their thriving, flourishing, and functioning is dependent upon having strong male figures to help mentor and guide them. And it's like this amorphous, any male will do, I'll get my daddy, my uncle, my brother, and them to do it. If that shit was working, then why is there the downward mobility? If this amorphousness, like any old nigga will do, then why is the shit not working, man? And we already know, like, that black girls are not really deeply impacted by this shit.
No, but we just don't understand capitalism, so that's all it is.
It's just, and the question is, we already know that one of the tenets of second wave feminism is that patriarchy in and of itself inheres in familial relationships in, these so-called two-parent homes. That's where the patriarchy really resides, right? I mean, BGS has done a lot of shit about this. I'm not going to go into it and try to explain the various factors that could or could not contribute to, men actually being involved in, so-called familial situation where he's there, he's actually present. But goddamn, bro, like, men are not present in families the way that they used to be. And the question is, why is that the case? It's just niggas just don't want to be there?
Yeah, they're comfortable with that answer. I mean, that's what I was saying earlier. When it comes to, a matter of fact, I'm arguing with this person who came in and one of the comments on my videos 10 minutes ago, arguing that very point. Black men aren't there because they're deadbeats. No, actually, black men have been, the research suggests they're the most involved fathers. They're just not married to the mothers. But when you look at the dynamics as to why, nobody wants to talk about the reasons why black men have been pulling away from marriage since the 1960s. Nobody wants to talk about that. Instead, it's comfortable to just label and dismiss them.
Niggas just don't want to be there.
Yeah.
Niggas just don't like being there. And look, here's the issue, okay? This men not being there. Look, it takes two to tango, man. It takes two to be in a relationship. But we do live in a culture that emphasizes negative liberty to the exclusion of all other kinds of freedom, right? Which there's the freedom of self-realization, the freedom of self-perfection, freedom that comes about through cooperation. But for the most part, I think, like the insistence on, being single, I can make it on my own. I don't need no man. I don't have to be dependent and all this shit. I think there are many reasons why that's the case. One of them is the feminist movement, which kind of tells women that they can have it all. Fuck the niggas, fuck men. Men are oppressive. They're too much responsibility. Why would you want to have to deal with all the hegemonic masculinity? Then on the other hand, you have, the enhanced presence of bureaucracies, which fulfill and perform roles or functions that traditionally were performed by men. Okay, like in an agricultural society or agri-based society where there aren't EBT programs, Section 8 programs, WIC programs, child health insurance programs, and all that kind of shit. Like, how do you get support? Mm-hmm. Like, how the fuck do you do it? You do it by being involved and you do it by being there, right? But now we got all of these concepts and notions about romantic love. I'm really with the person I love. I found my soulmate and all this shit. Man, look, all I'm saying is, and it's been demonstrated, man, when fathers are not involved in the lives of their children and are there as stewards and custodians, as strongly and as, pervasively as women, then it has a deleterious effects on boys, man. Mm-hmm. And quite frankly, let me find the name of the study, bro. So this, this dude doesn't think I'm lying. Downward mobility, and it was I think it was a Harvard study.
It was Raj Chetty.
Okay, I forgot the Opportunity Project. I think it was, and we doing this shit ad hoc. We ain't doing no, all I'm getting is, I'm seeing articles related to the research, but I'm not seeing, and I don't want to.
Usually they have a link in the article to it too.
Yeah. Let me see, hold on, I just want to cover that before I move on so that, why am I at Quartz? This shit doesn't even make sense, man. I'm in all kind of goddamn,
Here, I'm gonna post the New York Times, review of it in the comment. Well, I don't think I can. I'll just send it to you in the private chat.
Okay, yeah. So, okay, what is happening among these boys and the men they become? Though black girls and women face deep inequality on many measures, black and white girls from families with comparable earnings attain similar individual incomes as adults. So there's not this lacuna or this big gap between how black women and white women are performing in the marketplace and in education. But there is a lacuna when it comes to a comparison between white boys and black boys.
Right.
Okay. And so the question is, what are we doing about this? Now, of course, you can't really do anything about it because as soon as you start talking about advancing the interests of black boys and working on their deficits and working on the injustices that accrue to them in a society that's mostly hostile to them, then, of course, you're doing something that's sexually discriminatory. And, of course, we can't fucking have that now, can we?
Well, the other part to it too is Chetty's work illustrated that not only were black boys the group, and if they were upper class, they fell out of the upper class to the greatest degree and were not able to return to it. If they were lower class, they stayed in the lower class to the greatest degree, and that even black women, if relating to marrying, being in relationships, their upward mobility was somewhat tied to black men. If they, in terms of if they had relationships with black men and children with black men. Many of them actually weren't able to, go up the ladder as easily. So what he was basically showing us was how poverty ties in to black men more so than any other demographic, most particularly in relation to white folks and black women. And he was showing it at every class level.
So let me show this shit right now. I'm gonna share the screen. I'm gonna share it on my StreamYard as opposed to sharing it on my OBS. So it says, so there's the Race and Economic Opportunity in the United States article written by the Equality of Opportunity Project, right? And it's written by Nathaniel Hendren, Maggie Jones, and Sonia R. Porter, okay? And this is one of many such articles written on this subject, man. I mean, you know, you can find the shit out there. It's out there, okay? Finding number one, Hispanic Americans are moving up in the income distribution across generations, while Black Americans and American Indians are not. Okay? So that's the first finding, okay? Second finding, the black-white income gap is entirely driven by differences in men's, not women's outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yes.
Number three, differences in family characteristics, parental marriage rates, education, wealth, and differences in ability explain very little of the black-white gap. So if this is something that we know, marriage ain't gonna, it's not the way out of this shit. Do you understand what I'm saying? This is demonstrating that marrying black women is not the fucking key to get out of this shit. That's the third finding. Am I lying about this or am I wrong about this? Differences. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Differences in family characteristics, parental marital race, education, wealth, and differences in ability explain very little of the black-white gap. In 99% of neighborhoods in the United States, black boys earn less in adulthood than white boys who grow up in families with comparable income. Finding number five, both black and white boys have better outcomes in low poverty areas, but black-white gaps are bigger in such neighborhoods. Number six, within low poverty areas, black-white gaps are smallest in places with low levels of racial bias among whites and high rates of father presence among blacks.
But hold on though. But partly he's not advocating for marriage necessarily. He's saying that relationships that mimic white society are the problem. We have to move away from the model, right? But when you really get to the core, what a lot of intersectional feminists are talking about as a quote unquote ideal model is somewhat like what you hear from BLM, right? It's non-traditional, it's gender fluid. And if anything, usually the entity that's required the least in terms of how these families are conceptualized are heterosexual black men. You know, but he's trying to argue that that's part of the problem, that the manosphere is pushing for traditional relationships and that the model is outdated, and what needs to be what it needs to be replaced with are these kind of amorphous gender neutral gender. You know, it's bullshit.
Man, look. Your daddy ain't there, nigga. It fucks up the young boys up, man. I mean, like, is this difficult to understand, man? No, I just don't fucking understand this shit. And it's creating more of a lacuna in the wealth gap.
Yeah.
That people give credit to. Like, and intersectional feminists really don't give a fuck because all they care about is black women and girls anyway. And
right.
Black, whether they black fucking male intersectionalists or not. They just don't give a fuck because they think they can change thousands of years of history and social development by arguing for the negative liberty of women in relation to what they're supposed to get in a fucking token-based neoliberal system. Come on, bro. Like, at the end of the day, man, men are vital and necessary constitutive parts of the ecology of the black community, or need to be regarded as such. But instead, I mean, you know, we get niggas ain't shit, they dusties, they crusty, they ain't high value enough, they bums, they homosexuals, they pookies, they ray-rays, these niggas ain't doing what they need to do, they deadbeats and so on and so forth. Like, I'm just saying, like, no shade, but I mean, like we said, look, this cat is married with kids to a black woman. So, so at the end of the day, would you give up your kids, nigga, in order to fit into a better motherfucking, you know, system that's more equitable or some shit like that? You willing to say fuck your kids if your woman rages out on you and decides to fuck the nigga down the street? Huh? Because she can, my dude. At the end of the day, she can if she desires. And that's what black men are talking about, is the domination by the family court system and policy that has been in place or has been in the making for at least a century and a half, bro. In fact, when it comes to, familial situations, man, black men are not really actually there the way that they should be. The whole idea, the concept, the notion of the black patriarchal father is not there at all. And you got black men who are like, got kids and shit and getting blocked from seeing their kids and having involvement with their kids. And if they do have involvement, they have involvement as fucking uncle daddies, part-time visitors and shit. And they gotta jump through hoops like fucking show dogs in order to get access to their own fucking offspring. And this is one of the issues the black men in the manosphere have. And then they have a problem with their own economic and upward mobility. See, the whole problem is that they fucking around playing games with black men's ideas and their expressions and their experiences, bro.
Well, hold on.
And that's what I don't like about this shit.
But
You're fucking around with the experiences of black men and trivializing the shit.
But tell me this, where else are black men able to even have that conversation? See, again, we try to sidestep the reasons the manosphere came into being. It came into being because men could not have a space to do that anywhere else, and you damn sure couldn't do it in the academy. You know how many professors reach out to me because they're hampered and can't speak?
Look, man, I like to play devil's advocate a lot. So some of the shit that other guys can't get away with, I think I can get away with. But I mean, at the end of the day, bro, I know that motherfuckers are silenced. They feel like they don't have a voice. They feel like they can't speak against the narrative. Otherwise, they won't be deemed or perceived as people who have the right kind of norms and values associated with diversity and inclusion and shit like that. And so therefore, they're worried about whether or not they'll reach tenure, or even if they have tenure, whether they'll be blackballed because they don't meet up to the objectives and the mission statements of the university itself, which, by the way, is primarily white all across the fucking world. I mean, America, any goddamn way. I mean, there's a dearth of black professors. Even though you got a lot of black women who are enrolled in college and who get degrees and shit, you still have a dearth of black women there, and the dearth of black men being present there is even worse. It's even less black men in these positions. Okay? And you'll start to see that shit grow in the coming years. And if you've been steadily fed a diet of a certain kind of ideology which you cannot contest, which you cannot critique, then that to me results in, like a lack of balance and impartiality in the epistemological process, which is supposed to be the acquisition of information to begin with, bro. That's what we got an issue with, dog. And we don't care if we get, I don't give a fuck about being called a misogynist, the misogyn-wise, the none of that shit. I really don't give a fuck. Being called toxic, whatever the case may be. Okay? Now, I was raised by a single mom, man. I did have a stepfather. My father's present in my life. I've always been present. My mother never said a bad word about my father or none of that shit. Ever. Okay, I still talk to my dad damn near every week. Damn near sometimes 4-5 times out of the days of a week. Okay? But the whole point though is, if you ain't got male mentorship, man, and you moving through life, how the fuck you supposed to learn how to be a man at all? How you supposed to learn how to navigate through the pitfalls? Because there's a lot of them out here for black boys. How the fuck do you navigate through that? Oh, well, just drop the toxic masculinity. Just drop the hegemonic masculinity. Stop trying to be a man and everything will work out. Stop feeling aggrieved. Don't have any grievances, even though everybody fucking around you has grievances. The other grievances are more important because yours are the ones that are paid most attention to. Mm-hmm. So fuck what you got to say. And look, I don't do respectability politics, bruh, at all. And I do understand the history of mass incarceration and criminality and the whole nine. Like, you got people who are not just playing the conservative line, bro. And although, you know, I'm not conservative, I'm not a liberal either. I'm an independent thinker, bro.
Right. Me too.
I believe in deliberative democratic theory like Iris Marion Young, Nancy Fraser, Jürgen Habermas. I'm an advocate like Amy Gutman and Dennis Thompson. You know what I'm saying? That's the sort of shit I'm into. Having conversations, working on decision-making through dialogue in the public sphere, and letting everyone have a participative role to play. I believe in the, you know, the liberty of the ancients more than I do of the moderns. That's just me. And it's also part of an African process of decision making where motherfuckers stay up all night until the decision is made based upon consensus. That's the sort of shit I'm into in terms of making decisions collectively and deciding, you know, the self-determination of the collective of the whole. But at the end of the day, bro, this ain't just a one-trick pony space. It ain't just a bunch of motherfucking pickup artists telling vulnerable men how to fucking get women, how to get pussy. It's not what this shit is about, bro. It ain't about, man, pressuring women into marriage. It's about men saying, fuck it, if I can't find a woman who actually will listen to what the fuck I got to say and wants to rule the household like a fucking tyrant, to hell with it. I'm off. I'm gonna do some other shit somewhere else.
But it's also a space where men can actually have any conversation they want relevant to their experience. And how many places can black men in particular boast that? You can talk about anything you want to in the manosphere as long as it's relevant to the lives of black men.
And it should be, man, everyone should have a space where they can have open and honest and earnest dialogue, whether it be quality or not quality. Hopefully, you know, we'll begin to filter some ideas into the space which are actually more closer and come, you know, and approximate the truth more than not. But it's not just a space where men come in to hate on women. We got women in the fucking space and they're not stupid and dumb and are working just, you know, out of their, you know, some sort of alienation. A lot of these women get it. It's like, damn, men have feelings too. You say you want men to express themselves, but you don't give us a space where we can fucking do it without being labeled as hegemons and shit like that. In other words, just shut up and say what the fuck we say. And if you don't say it, then, well, then you're a fuckboy.
Right.
And let's just be honest, half of these motherfuckers ain't read Gramsci all the way through. Half of these motherfuckers ain't read R.S.W. Connell all the way through. Some of these motherfuckers ain't read a lick of Foucault. Never read none of his shit. Ain't never read Judith Butler's Undoing Gender. Ain't never read Catherine McKenna's Towards a Feminist Theory of the State. Ain't never read John Stuart Mill on, you know, liberty for women and shit like that. I guarantee you, man, I've taken 3 graduate seminars in feminist philosophy. I've read all of this shit from Jane Mainsbridge all the way up to the New Jacks, bruh. I've read Bell Hooks. I've read Zombie by Audre Lorde. I've read Gloria Steinem. I've read The Feminist Mystique by Betty Friedan. I've read Andrea Dworkin. I've read Ellen Pence and The Power and Control Wheel. I've read all this shit, bro. And some of it I agree with. Some of it I don't agree with. I definitely don't agree with dominance feminism because I don't think there's any empirical grounding for the shit at all. We just saw a goddamn man get drugged through the court system or drug a woman through the court system for defaming his character. Now this woman is in the fucking household doing all kind of ignorant shit to him, but she's able to come out as an advocate of violence against women while she in the fucking household terrorizing the motherfucker through violence.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about Amber Heard.
Yep.
And how many men are undergoing these experiences on a daily basis, but they can't even say shit about it because to say anything at all is to be less than a fucking man. Or to even consciousness raise or develop, you know, the tentative kind of ideas and concepts surrounded around it, you know, their experiences. To even do so is to be a fucking misogynist. Then you got a whole cadre of motherfuckers coming out with blog pieces and shit that don't study nothing, ain't read shit but blog pieces and, you know, watch some videos, and then all of a sudden they done figured out what the problem is. And I ain't saying this to this guy, I'm just saying, damn, you welcome to come have a conversation. Talk about the shit. Stop hiding behind your own echo chambers and shit, and come out and have real, candid, open conversations. Some of the guys do it. Most of them don't. I've seen David Eichert at least do it. I've seen him do it. But I don't see most of these motherfuckers coming out and having a debate. At least the white women had debates amongst themselves about this kind of shit. I got a video on my own channel where you got like, okay, has the women's movement been a spectacular disaster? You had Ariana Huffington, Betty Friedan, Camille Paglia, amongst a whole bunch of other people on the panels. And they went back and forth about what they thought were some of the excesses and the deficiencies of the feminist movement. But we can't, like, the black community has not evolved to a space where we can have any conversations about this shit at all. It's either one way or no way. It's either the enlightened people working in behalf of justice and equity and egalitarianism for all, or the regressive conservative black nationalists who want to fucking put women barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen and make them fix some sandwiches and shit. And if they don't do it, they get black eyes.
Yeah.
Come on, man. Like, it's that fucking simple,
order.
Right?
It's a feminist religious order at this point.
Bro, do I think that women at some point in this country, man, had not been actually given the same access as men to professions and political positions? We know that that's true. We know this. But we also know that it was the same way for most men in this motherfucker. I mean, damn, around the time the founding of the Constitution was put into place, man, only 6% of the population of the United States had access to the franchise. This is just the facts of the history of the United States. Now, we can talk about, how men and, during the early part of the 19th century had access to the vote and women didn't, and then later on they did. In the 20th century or whatever the case may be. But goddamn, most people in the United States have never had access to liberty and freedom in a substantive way. That's the shit we need to be talking about. But now we call it the fucking gender war. And we definitely ain't talking about the deleterious effects that it has on black men with any degree of candor. And that's the problem I have with it. So we're in this space to provide some sort of balance to the kind of narratives that have been put out there. It ain't about us hating women. I got some down-ass women that I fuck with on a regular basis. And I gotta challenge them, they challenge me. But it's about having a dialogue openly and candidly and challenging one another so that we can get closer to the truth. But just coming out with blanket statements and calling people fuck boys and shit like that, man, come on, bro. And then reducing the black manosphere to black conservatism and, niggas want to give, it's a lot of men that don't want to get married at all. They like, fuck marriage in this current political climate. It's a no-go.
And ironically, people want to know why men don't want to marry, but they don't want to hear from men why they don't want to marry. So feminists step in and tell people why men don't want to marry, but they don't talk to men to find out why men don't want to marry. And when the manosphere does it and men themselves articulate it, then everybody's up in arms. Interesting.
It's just the way the game goes. We ain't got but like a couple more minutes left of this shit. So let's look at a little more and then we done, bro. We got to be done with this dude.
The rhetoric about black women not being submissive and blah, 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 blah. You have heard this before. In accordance to that, there have long since been black male figures, especially in the comedy world, such as with Patrice O'Neal, and on YouTube even 10, 15 years ago, who have made money and gained notoriety by peddling misogyny disguised as black liberation. They'll say that the black family must be fixed and that this cannot be done if the black woman doesn't get behind her men. It doesn't matter that this has never really been how this has worked in our society, in our culture, and even in many cultures in Africa, or that white supremacy bars so many black men from access to the economic and social capital they need to be heads of the household. It doesn't matter, do it anyway, or you hate black people. There are old archives of a lot of these men's content on YouTube if you want to find it. This complicates the black manosphere a bit because while these men still uphold the status quo and spew misogyny, they're also responding to a much more specific and legitimate set of oppressions as opposed to their white counterparts. This doesn't make it any better, it just makes their gripes a bit more legitimate. Aside from that, there's not a lot of material difference between black and white manosphere spaces. Sometimes the misogyny comes from a hotep, sometimes it comes from an aspiring Republican grifter, sometimes it's just a black version of the same sleazy pickup artist type character. White guys have men going their own way or MGTOW, black men have save yourself black men or SYSBM. Aside from this, all the other things between black and white men in this particular issue are rooted in the same overall constructs, including even some of the most extreme elements, which we'll get to later. One thing I really want to push against though is the myth that black men are more conservative or patriarchal or misogynistic than any other race of men. Pretty much every data point that you can point to about black men politically and socially disputes this, whether it be voting patterns, opinion polls, habits, and child rearing. So there's so much evidence that this is a myth, but sadly, black men don't get to define themselves for themselves. And the loudest and worst of us often get the most attention, which is also something I'll talk about a little later. That said, the loud bunch of black men who do attach their identity to the manosphere are just as ardent and dedicated and, ridiculous as any white consumer of the manosphere. So it's hard to see that sometimes. I get it. Another thing I did is
Okay, that's enough of that, bro. So I mean, at the end of the day, you don't really need to listen to these motherfuckers because much of what they call for is women to get in line and just, make them a sandwich or some shit. Like, come on, bro. Like, really? That's not what it's about for us. It's not about what it's about for me at all. It's about basically saying, look, we got problems with black men and boys and they have not been attended to, and goddamn it, we're going to start addressing them. And if we got to critique feminists along the way, we'll do so. If you want to get married, go ahead. But understand, it's an institution that the state controls. It's not something that just you and that woman are controlling by yourselves. And goddamn it, if she decides to split from you, bro, 9 times out of 10, she going to have custody of the kids and going to have a whole hell of a lot of power than you do. Understand that. Because the best interest of the child is because, okay, well, if men had privilege, patriarchal privilege like motherfuckers say they do, then why don't men get stewardship and custody of the kids like they did before the Custody of Infants Act in 1839? Why is she deemed as being a better nurturer? It has to be an archetype or a stereotype about her fitness and her role as a nurturer as opposed to that of a man that enables this kind of thinking or promotes it. Right? Yep. So at the end of the day, man, I'm just, look, bruh. Don't fucking stereotype us. Come talk to us and you can find out what we really saying, bruh. You can really find out what we believe and what we think. And what we're responding to. We're responding to 60 some odd years of the defamation of the black male character. In the academy, in government, in media, and as soon as we start saying things, oh, well, the loudest, most misogynistic and hateful niggas get a voice. There's no promotion. There's no corporations bankrolling our shit. We don't have movie deals. I mean, you might have a few comedians who speak what they want to speak or say what they want to say. But at the end of the day, man, I mean, come on. And please don't talk about hip hop as a misogynistic place and start talking about LL Cool J or fucking goddamn Too Short when they was 20 years old saying misogynistic shit, when you got grown-ass women with PhDs engaging in fucking stereotypical discourse about black men. Please don't try to compare that shit.
Look, man. This is the last thing I got to say on this, because I'm just, ugh. But last thing I'll say is I have never in my lifetime seen a space where black men from so many divergent contexts can actually dialogue. I've never seen it. Class, geography, occupation, ideology, religion, philosophy, on every metric you can think of. I've never seen a space where this many men, most particularly this many black men, can actually come together and actually have a dialogue about issues relevant to them. I've never seen it. And I didn't even mention politics, but I've never seen it before. This is the first time in my life I've seen a space this diverse. And the first reaction people have is fear and slander.
Well, hey, man.
Yeah.
Well, you got a show coming up. Why don't you announce that you're about to do that, and then I'm about to just jump on yours.
Yeah, man. Gigi and I are going to look at something some of you guys have been telling me in my comment section. There was an attack at the Dollar Tree store, and I don't think Gigi's had a chance to watch the video. So that's great. That's actually how I want it, because I want to get his raw reaction on first viewing, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. It's going to be a short hit, but we're going to get through it. So, in a few minutes when we close out of here, I'm going to start up a stream over there on my channel and deal with that.
Well, I'll holler at y'all, man. Thank you for coming. I know it was long. We didn't plan this. It was impromptu. We talked about doing it, but we took some time to, get together to actually do it. It's a Friday, man. We all just trying to chill out, man. But, we feel like we have the right to participate in the public sphere. You can ad hom us if you want to. You can try to analyze us using Gramsci, Connell. But, the funny thing about Connell is, man, and I think that this needs to be stated before I even leave. Connell started off so she wrote a book called Gender and Power in 1987. And initially, she tried to use this concept of hegemonic masculinity as a way to explain forms of masculinity and femininity, right? And I'm reading from Curry to some degree. I'm kind of overlooking what he has to say about it and looking at her quotations. And she's, their interrelation is centered on a single structural fact, the global dominance of men over women. Now that's in 87. So Connell does not believe that there is a hegemonic form of femininity, but that there is a form of hegemonic masculinity, right? But hegemony means, and this is Connell herself, means a social ascendancy achieved in play of social forces that extends beyond contest of brute power into the organization of private life and cultural processes. Ascendancy of one group of men over another achieved at the point of a gun or by threat of unemployment is not hegemony. Ascendancy, which is embedded in religious doctrine and practice, mass media content, wage structures, the design of housing, welfare, taxation policies, and so forth is. Okay, so she wants to separate her theory of hegemonic masculinity from sex role theory. Okay, but it does not equate to violent masculinity. That's one thing people must understand about hegemonic masculinity. She says, where violence is central to the assertion of gendered power, we can be certain that hegemony is not present, because hegemony refers to cultural centrality and authority to the broad acceptance of power by those over whom it is exercised. And so my question, like I posed to Tia-San Johnson earlier, where the fuck in the black community do you have a whole scale acceptance on the part of black women that black men supposed to run shit and be in control of the household?
Never seen it.
Where, bruh?
Never seen it. Never seen it. But let me.
Okay, and wait a minute. Hegemonic masculinity is not the only account of masculinity, or it's not present in every fucking culture, which is often presented in dominant feminist theories, okay? Like it's everywhere, it's ubiquitous. So she wrote a book called Masculinities, okay? And she basically says that hegemonic masculinity shows up primarily and is mostly isolated to modern capitalist societies, okay? And it's built on the idea of individuality, which is developed within the context of the European Enlightenment and the growth of colonial empire, okay? But in 2005, she basically rejects the idea that hegemonic masculinity explains a relationship, a necessary relationship between men and other men and women. And this is what she says. The formulation in Gender and Power attempted to locate all masculinities and all femininities in terms of a single pattern of power, the global dominance of men over women. While this was useful at the time in preventing the idea of multiple masculinities from collapsing into an array of competing lifestyles, it is now clearly inadequate to our understanding of relations among groups of men and forms of masculinity and of women's relations with dominant masculinities. And then she finally ends up saying, rather than speaking of the globalization of gender, it is more accurate to speak of the coloniality of gender. In colonization, native bodies were coerced to form plantation, pastoral, and domestic workforces. Land was seized. New power structures were built around the colonial state. These processes disrupted indigenous gender orders, often with great violence. And here's the last quote. The creation of the imperialist world order involves a global differentiation in gender patterns or of gender patterns, or inserts a global dimension to their definition. The frontier of trade, conquest, or settlement exalted forms of masculinity different from those becoming dominant in the core countries. The expansion of white settlement involves a dialectic of masculinities and femininities, as well as race and class. The women were invading white men's realms as well as the land of the blacks. So, I mean, look, women are involved in disrupting natural relationships between men and women all over the world, okay? And white women are a constitutive part of global hegemony, bruh. And colonial conquest and the slave-based project of segregation, of lynching, and the whole nine. And we want to bring attention to that and let people know that the widespread acceptance of the kind of categories that they've established and the way that they understand and view gender relations might not be the best or the accurate way to look at how oppression and domination actually exist and is carried out in the Western world.
But you know, the interesting thing about Connell, though, is Connell kind of does what was happening in various fields already. The ignoring of white women's roles, right? And so, in that respect, to even suggest that white women didn't have a comparable hegemonic femininity is highly problematic, or women in general, for that matter, highly problematic, right? That's why when you could go back and look at slavery, and somehow white women were just as oppressed as black folk. They were just, canaries in gilded cages, right? But I find it interesting that Connell, as a trans woman, is aspiring to a particular type of white womanhood that somehow is above a certain type of critique, at least at a certain point in her work. So I just find it interesting. Now, there might be a connection there that we don't talk about.
Yeah, I need to look into that more deeply, bro. But like CLC says, didn't Connell say that black men are not really part of the hegemonic masculinity in countries like the U.S.? She did say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, she did say that. Okay? And also, you know, men in the South as well. She said that. Some men, you know, like poor class men. And then, of course, like the dude already said, though, he already had to admit, like, you know, the black, I'm not calling for black women to be under the thumb of black men. I'm just saying, give Negroes access to their fucking kids, man. Stop being an asshole and leveraging the criminal justice system and the family court system to the detriment of black men. Stop promoting stereotypes about who we are. Do some of us do fucked up shit? Hell yeah. Are some of us sexist? Hell yeah. Are some of us regressive in relation to women? Hell yeah. But so are some of y'all motherfuckers.
Well, and
I'm keeping it a buck.
Well, I actually do think that there's a problem with entitlement. I think there's a problem with cooperation. And by cooperation, I simply mean just dealing with men with a basic level of respect. I do think there are issues with that go beyond just individual engagements. I do think there is more of a collectivist issue with black women's behavior with black men, not in every circumstance. I don't even know why we introduced that, but in too many circumstances, because I think it's a feature in how we're socialized, where men are not perceived as a demographic worthy of a certain level of respect. I do think there are issues with that. So it's not, so going back to your point, I'm not saying anything about them being under thumb, but I will point out some, you know, overall perspectives about men that do need to be challenged. And I don't think that they're you know, a limited enterprise. I think this is fairly wide scale in the black community. I think misandry has been internalized within African American culture. I do believe that.
For sure, bro. For sure, bro. But I want to thank CLC. He says what he said earlier, so I already put that out there. There's a brother named Leon. He says, do you think it's better to have a tribe and be married? Grandparents plus wife and husband, that'll be best outcome in my opinion. Extended family kind of experience. Man, at the end of the day, man, I just think that motherfuckers need to be grown-ups, man, and stop fucking wanting to have shit their way. Like, if you engage in a relationship with somebody and you make an oath, I mean, you know, shit don't always work out, but at least be fucking reasonable about how it ends up at the end of the day. Don't try to be a tyrant and be an asshole. You know what I'm saying? He says, well, the most visible leaders of the black manosphere are rather conservative, aren't they? The three kings of the black manosphere support Trump, right? I don't know who the three kings of the black manosphere are, actually, so I couldn't tell you. I didn't know there were any kings here. Julius Ferguson says, I'm wondering if he can defend his claims with scholars who know the data in and out. GG and Dr. Johnson, a real debate. I mean, he's welcome to come holler at us. Black Men Brutally Honest says, sounds like he's directing his convoluted argument to straight black men or the white men of black people. Well, we've heard that argument before via Damon Young, which to me is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah,
and I'm sorry, I'm just going over.
Young-esque. It is, yeah.
Because basically the whole point is that, you know, black men are mimicking white men and their ambitions through the hegemonic ideal. You know, right. They want to be like white men. Like, you know, they want to mimic the behavior and comportment of white men. But when you look at the studies, it demonstrates that most often, like, black men, that's not what they're looking for. Okay.
But his whole argument is rooted in black men's ignorance or stupidity. We don't understand capitalism. We don't understand white supremacy. We don't understand, you know, we don't understand the various figures he wants to invoke in terms of theory. You know, his whole argument is predicated on what black men don't understand that everybody else implicitly gets. Where's that argument really going?
Bro, I just feel like we need a voice, man, just like everybody else. Shout out to brotherly love. Whether we wrong or right. If we're wrong, correct us in real time. Have a conversation with us that's not disrespectful. If y'all observe the norms of reciprocity, we'll observe the norms of reciprocity in political conversation and discussion. But calling us fuckboys and conservative dupes and, you know, like motherfuckers who want to be white guys, man, that shit ain't gonna work, bro. Shout out to Ray Knows. I support the 3 PhDs. But shout out to all the people who, you know, donated today, man. I appreciate your help and your support to keep the channel going and to keep this thing moving and going. And we about to just get to, fucking fly came on my head, bro. This motherfucking fly got in the house. Don't ask me how. But yeah, I'm about to get on Dr. Johnson's channel, man. We about to do this. So we'll holler at y'all in a quick minute, man. And we out of here, man. We done.
Peace.
Peace.